Chapter 24:13. Dui Miaoqing had fallen, but her corpse could be easily sent into the space. Xiaohua even received the tide bead, and then he waved the wishful steel staff and walked towards the closest flying sword. But when he reached the flying sword, Xiaohua was dumbfounded again. The flying sword was hanging high above. Even if he stretched the wishful steel staff to its maximum length, he still couldn't reach it. Now that he couldn't fly, how could he do it? Xiaohua thought a little and used the ethereal steps. The light body technique was now in effect. Although it was not high, it could still be barely reached in his eyes. Just as Xiaohua waved the wishful steel staff and took out the magic wand to hit the flying sword suddenly jumped up and then shook. A flying sword fell from the flying sword and stabbed straight at Xiaohua's forehead. "Grandma, this trick also won't work!" Xiaohua cursed and casually hit the flying sword with the wishful steel staff. With a dang sound, the flying sword was not broken. It only shook slightly and broke into Xiaohua's body. Not good! Xiaohua's heart jumped. His right hand didn't have time to clench into a fist, so he had to open his mouth and release the execution dream. With a dang sound, it hit the tip of the flying sword. Sparks splashed, and the flying sword was shocked into several pieces. However, these several pieces once again turned into several sword lights and continued to stab towards Xiaohua without mercy. Separate, Xiaohua hurriedly urged the flying sword, and the execution dream immediately turned into several, facing the several sword lights. Finally, all the sword lights were destroyed. "Grandma," Xiaohua breathed a sigh of relief, and his forehead was really sweating. "Oh, it's a little weird." Xiaohua suddenly realized something at this time. All the spiritual sense in the sword array was imprisoned, and he couldn't use any spells at all. But how could he use his spiritual sense to drive the flying sword? Didn't Martial Uncle Dui say that? Only the magical powers of sword cultivators can be used here. The magical powers of other cultivators are restricted. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and he finally thought of a way to escape. However, since he was confident, he opened his Dharma eyes slightly and walked out of the sword formation. He wanted to see if he could walk out of the sword formation. However, when he had only taken a few steps away from the flying sword, an incomparably sharp sword chi blocked his way. That sword chi was light blue in his Dharma eyes like a wall. Although Xiaohua had yet to approach, that sharp sword chi had already cut through his Taoist robe. Xiaohua had no doubt that if he were to force his way through, even if he had tempered his body for a long time, he would still be cut into pieces by this sword chi. "Forget it. If that's the case, I can only use my sword formation to counter your sword formation." Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He slowly walked back to the center of the sword formation, and with a wave of his hand, the sword pouch flew out. "Rise." Xiaohua pointed with his finger, and his primordial spirit used the sword pouch's method of using it. "Come!" 7 consecutive sword cries rang out, and the flying swords of Ling Yunwu and the others flew out from the sword pouch. When the 7 flying swords flew out, they immediately flashed with 7 resplendent lights inside the sword formation, illuminating the area around Xiaohua. Within the light, the flying swords also fiercely trembled. "Come!" They emitted faint sword cries, and these sword cries became increasingly deep and powerful. In the end, the 4 flying swords in the formation also emitted faint sword cries. Woo! The 7 flying swords fell into the sword formation, and very naturally, they arranged themselves according to the sword pouch's formation, forming the appearance of the 7 stars formation. A faintly discernible sword intent was emitted from the sword tip, covering Xiaohua from head to toe. Inside the 7 stars formation, all the sword lights fell into the boiling water like snowflakes and disappeared without a trace. What made Xiaohua even more happy was that the sword lights outside the 7 stars formation also stopped and no longer fell into the 7 stars formation. "Great!" Xiaohua let out a long breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Although the wishful staff didn't dance, it was still in his hand to deal with any accidents. After resting for a moment, Xiaohua walked out of the great array, and the 7 stars great array moved along with him. Fortunately, the incomparably sharp edges of the sword array were considered nothing within the 7 stars great array. Xiaohua very easily escaped from the sword array surrounded by the 4 flying swords. When Xiaohua came out of the sword formation, the 4 flying swords began to slowly vibrate, and it seemed like they were going to hide in the stone wall. In the space of several dozen feet, the illusion of the stone wall appeared again. "Oh, this is... Martial Uncle Dui Hui!" Xiaohua's gaze swept over and saw the lifelike corpse of the female cultivator. Her Taoist robe was similar to Dui Miaoqing's. Xiaohua drove the 7 stars formation and walked over, storing the several corpses into the space, and then he immediately activated the sword formation. In just a moment, everything returned to its original state. In front of Xiaohua's eyes was a huge dome. Below the dome was the 1,000-meter-tall rock pillar that he had seen before. The bottom of the rock pillar was extremely deep, like a huge spindle reaching into the depths of the rock abyss. "Is there a big secret of sword cultivators here?" Xiaohua looked around the rock pillar. It seemed that there were cracks all around, and those cracks had faintly disappeared just now. In other words, the rock pillar was surrounded by the sword formation laid out by the 4 flying swords. No matter which direction you came from, you had to pass through the sword formation in order to reach the rock pillar. If someone said that there was no big secret inside the rock pillar, even if you beat him to death, he wouldn't believe it. But what kind of secret was inside the rock pillar? Of course, Xiaohua wasn't in the mood to investigate at this time, because Dui Miaoqing had already said that this sword formation couldn't be resisted by a middle-stage golden core cultivator, so it must have been set up by a swordsman. Xiaohua boasted that he wasn't interested in a secret that could be valued by a swordsman. His task was to bring Dui Miaoqing's message and Dui Hui's suspicion back to Sky Patrol City. His task didn't include finding out this secret. That was something a nascent soul cultivator had to do. Xiaohua and Xiao Mao had to save them. As soon as he turned around, Xiaohua prepared to escape into the rock wall. He understood that this place was already deep under the lake, and the force inside the rock wall was very strong. As long as he didn't resist, he would definitely be sent to the surface. However, just as Xiaohua turned around, a feeling of reluctance came from the bottom of his heart. "Oh?" Xiaohua was stunned. Puzzled, he stopped and slowly turned around. When he faced the rock pillar, that indescribable feeling had already disappeared. When Xiaohua turned around again, that feeling didn't appear again. Strange! Xiaohua scratched his head. He really couldn't think of this so-called key secret of the sword cultivator war. What did it have to do with him? Could it be that he participated in the sword cultivator war with the mission to stop the swordsman's conspiracy? Was he born to end the Tao cultivator war? Damn it, forget it! A group of golden core cultivators used the lives of many foundation establishment cultivators and chi refinement cultivators to train themselves. The illusory sword swordsmen also used the lives of a group of bright sword swordsmen and nurturing sword swordsmen to train themselves. Behind them are nascent soul cultivators and swordsmen. None of them are people that I can provoke. Thinking about the swordsmen of Chicken Crow Mountain, who split a large mountain with one sword, if I expose their secret, won't they chase me all over the Dawn Rain continent? It's already difficult for me to deal with Taoist Jing Si, let alone a few more swordsmen. Xiaohua had just seen Feng Buping's power, and was very afraid of the swordsman. He turned around and was about to leave, but after taking 2 steps, another kind of understanding was born in his mind. I was wrong! Xiaohua stopped, his gaze somewhat deep. He used his hand to pinch his chin and turned to look at the stone pillar. I had a feeling of karma when I came to the great array of Quanjin Mountain. Originally, I thought I was going to send a message to the Imperial Thunder Sect's elders that I was safe. But after I met Li Zongbao, I thought I was going to send a message to Fairy Hong Xia that I was safe. But after I came to the Gale Snowfield, I thought I was going to save Xiao Mao. But after I arrived at the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain Spirit Stone Vein, I thought I was going to save Dui Miaoqing. But now, I finally realize that I came here to expose this huge secret of the sword cultivators. All the karma is pushing me to stop the war and save the lives of thousands of cultivators. Since the hand of karma has such an arrangement, I will also fight with my life. The corner of Xiaohua's mouth raised a trace of a smile. It's not like I haven't been chased by a nascent soul cultivator before. So what if there are a few more swordsmen? If they have the ability, then catch up to me first. In an instant, Xiaohua's heroic spirit soared to the sky. That lofty ambition was like a torrential river, as if he could seize the moon in the sky and capture the dragon in the sea at any time. With a wave of his hand, he took out the wishful staff that he had stored in his space. Xiaohua steadily walked in front of the stone pillar and sized it up again. After looking for a long time, he didn't feel anything special, so Xiaohua opened his transcendence vision again. Seeing the situation of the stone pillar in his transcendence vision, Xiaohua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The whole stone pillar looked like a spindle, with two sharp ends and a bulge in the middle. And where the bulge was, there was a steady stream of light blue brilliance. This brilliance flew to two parts. One part rushed to the top of the spindle and gathered at the sharp end. The sharp end had a faint fiery red color, which seemed brilliant and obscure. The other part rushed to the bottom of the spindle and also gathered at the sharp end, but the sharp end had a faint emerald color, which was bright and obscure. Yin-yang two springs mountain. Yin-yang two poles. Seeing these two different points in brilliance, he immediately thought of the two poles of magnetism that he had seen before in the dark secret ground. Isn't this spindle similar to the magnetism? This is the core of the Two Springs Mountain. Xiaohua secretly nodded. I reckon that the sword cultivators were originally mining here, and then they dug a tunnel from the vein to this abyss. And through this abyss, the swordsman found the core of the Two Springs Mountain. That crack might be the work of the swordsman. -8. Chapter 24:14. But what secret is there in this place? What is the key that will affect the sword battle? Xiaohua looked at the blue brilliance that was pouring down like a waterfall before his eyes. He searched everywhere he knew, but he couldn't find anything strange. I'm afraid I have to go in and take a look. Xiaohua closed his Dharma eyes, activated his flying technique, and flew towards the stone pillar. Who would have thought that just as his figure entered the abyss of the stone pillar, a kind of heavy pressure from all directions squeezed over. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He activated the Dharma power in his meridians, and the brilliance around his body flashed repeatedly, trying to resist this mountain-like heavy pressure. However, the more he activated his Dharma power, the stronger the pressure became. Even when Xiaohua activated the Immortal Body Bestowment Technique, he absorbed the light blue spiritual energy of heaven and earth while using his Dharma power. The pressure also rose steadily. It can't be! Seeing that his Dharma power had reached the limit, the pressure was still increasing. Xiaohua was somewhat dumbfounded. According to this trend, in a few more breaths of time, he would be crushed into a meat patty by this pressure. Buzz! Xiaohua had no choice but to activate the dragon transformation art to the limit again, and the Dharma power that far surpassed the late gold core stage surged out. Impossible! Xiaohua himself didn't dare to believe that the pressure was pressing him to death, and the light around his body had already dimmed. Even if it is a swordsman who transformed into a sword, their Dharma power, damn it, this young master misunderstood again. Xiaohua thought of the Dharma power of a swordsman and unconsciously realized something. He hurriedly reduced his Dharma power, and as expected, the pressure also decreased along with his Dharma power. Of course, the pressure didn't disappear because of the disappearance of Xiaohua's protective light. It even weakened to a certain extent, and then increased again. However, with the strength of Xiaohua's body, it was more than enough. Alas, there are many dangerous places in this world that test the body. Those Dharma power, divine sense, and so on are all limited. Xiaohua sighed in relief, and once again wiped the cold sweat on his head. He muttered to himself, but without Dharma power and divine sense, it is impossible to reach these dangerous places. The heavenly Tao is unpredictable. Following which, Xiaohua flew slowly. He tried to use as little magic power as possible, and used more ethereal steps to slowly approach the stone pillar. Although the rock pillar looked very calm, when Xiaohua approached it, a powerful force pulled Xiaohua straight up, as if it was being pushed by a huge stream of water. Xiaohua had seen the light blue brilliance before, so he knew that it was because the brilliance was pouring down. Therefore, he retreated a bit and flew towards the center of the spindle. Sure enough, the tearing force gradually weakened. When Xiaohua arrived at the depths of the abyss, he was in the middle of the stone pillar. The enormous force was indeed in a kind of relative equilibrium. Xiaohua closed his eyes and carefully tasted the two different tearing forces as he gradually flew closer to the rock wall. Xiaohua's upper body gradually emitted a fluttering sound. His hair also straightened up. Xiaohua's lower body also emitted a fluttering sound, but his entire Taoist robe was facing down. As Xiaohua got closer, the two forces became increasingly stronger. Although they were balanced, they actually had a tendency to split Xiaohua into two. Fortunately, this young master has been diligently tempering his bones and refining his body for the past few decades, so I can withstand this kind of tearing force that is rarely seen in the world, Xiaohua said with a smile as he felt the faint pain in his flesh and bones. Of course, Xiaohua stopped when he was about 10 zhang away from the stone pillar, and opened his transcendence vision again. What he saw with his transcendence vision was that the two different lights were strangely separated in the middle. Each of them formed a kind of arc, and the part in the middle was about the size of a fist and actually emitted a cyan color. A cyan color that was as bright as water. After looking for a long time, Xiaohua didn't gain anything. He slowly moved again, and while maintaining his balance, he circled around the stone pillar. This stone pillar was really big, at least 1,000 zhang. Xiaohua didn't dare to move too fast, so it took him more than 2 hours to reach the other side. And this was only half of the stone pillar. Here, it's here! When Xiaohua patiently saw a small fist-sized hole in the middle of the cyan color, he immediately came to a realization. This is so similar to that Chicken Crow Mountains. Innate gold essence. Could it be, there's an innate gold essence inside? Xiaohua's eyes widened. Whenever a heavenly treasure appeared, he would be especially spirited. However, it's definitely not some innate gold essence. If it's some innate object, it should be. Yes, an innate jellyfish. Xiaohua immediately understood. Damn it, this is the thing that the 3 elders of the Blazing Fire Mountain have been looking for. It actually appeared here? Didn't that adept Blue Feather say that he had some clues? Could it be that he also knows about this place? However, if Adept Blue Feather knew about this place, he would have come here long ago. Why would he wait until today? Sword cultivators also tampered with the innate gold essence. They must be tempering their bullshit flying swords, right? That Tai Cyan light can temper flying swords, making them incomparably sharp. How can this innate water chi temper flying swords? What special effects do flying swords have? Since there's a flying sword tempered by a sword cultivator right in front of me, how can this young master not take it? If it's taken into this young master's space, even if the Heavenly Emperor comes, this young master won't admit it. Xiaohua's eyes twinkled with the brilliance of spirit stones. It's this fist-sized hole again. Xiaohua's lips curled into a smile. Needless to say, this huge spindle must be condensed from innate water chi. No matter what kind of divine sense or sword chi, it won't be able to pass through. Only this one of the Dian number can pass through. However, aside from this young master's transformation technique, which cultivator can easily pass through this hole? According to this young master's thoughts, I'm afraid that even the nascent soul of a nascent soul cultivator wouldn't dare to enter, right? Ha! Xiaohua laughed heartily. His body strangely twisted like a fried dough twist. Soon after, his body fell horizontally. However, the two forces from above and below actually stretched Xiaohua horizontally. After several struggles, Xiaohua finally charged into the fist-sized hole like a noodle. When Xiaohua entered the several dozen zhang space, before his eyes was a boundless blue wave. This blue wave not only filled the heaven and earth, it also filled Xiaohua. Moreover, within this blue wave, there were numerous seemingly large but not large, seemingly small but not small, seemingly omnipresent small bubbles continuously gushing out. Just as Xiaohua's gaze came into contact with those bubbles, his eyes blurred and he immediately lost his primordial spirit. -8. Chapter 24:15. At the same time Xiaohua was lost, the surrounding water bubbles rushed over and quickly wrapped around Xiaohua. Those water bubbles began to collide with each other, and slowly, a water bubble as big as Xiaohua gradually formed. Needless to say, from the great shielding power of the water bubble, as long as this water bubble was formed, the inside of the bubble would become a sealed space. In this sealed space, divine sense could not penetrate, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth could not penetrate. Perhaps Xiaohua's fate was to become one with the innate water vapor. At this moment, a dragon's roar came from the middle of the blue water. The dragon's roar was both happy and sad, but at this time, it was more anxious. "Little White!" Xiaohua's primordial spirit was lost somewhere, but when he heard this dragon's roar, it was so familiar. On that bloodthirsty night, on the night that changed Xiaohua's fate and Shang Huaming's fate, Little White also cried out like this. This cry was deeply engraved in Xiaohua's soul. In an instant, Xiaohua's primordial spirit struggled, and the understanding of Tianmen Mountain's Huangyi gave Xiaohua endless help. The pain, the loneliness, the helplessness, and the bondage of time seemed to have given Xiaohua's primordial spirit wings. His primordial spirit passed through many different illusions like a white horse and suddenly returned to his body. When Xiaohua woke up and saw the situation around him, he could not help but break out in a cold sweat again. "Innate true water! Melting everything into water!" Such a sentence appeared in Xiaohua's mind. Xiaohua took out the wishful steel rod without hesitation and waved it wildly. Sure enough, it was worthy of being an innate weapon that was not in the 5 elements. The seemingly unstoppable innate true water was actually beaten back by the wishful steel rod, forming a very small space in front of Xiaohua. "Little White!" Xiaohua shouted. He closed his eyes tightly and opened his Dharma eyes. In the deepest part of the vast ocean, there was a place that was as bright as a jade pearl. Below the jade pearl, there was a sword light that was like jade water. It was unusually dazzling. That's it! Although there were no more Little White's dragon roars, Xiaohua already knew that the soul of the escaping Little White Dragon was near the jade pearl. Strangely enough, Xiaohua couldn't fly at all in this innate primordial water. He could only step on it step by step as he walked forward. Hua, the sound of waves could be heard as a boundless force pressed down from the front of Xiaohua, forcing Xiaohua to take a few steps back. On the contrary, when Xiaohua was retreating, there was also a huge force blocking him. Only Xiaohua could stand still and let the innate primordial water bubble up to him without any pressure. "Humph!" Xiaohua's Little White Dragon hissed weakly. His heart had been anxious for a long time. Seeing the pressure of the innate primordial water, he was also angry. With a cold snort, he waved the wishful staff towards the pressure in front of him. Fight! Sure enough, the heavy pressure was actually defeated by him. Then, Xiaohua quickly stepped forward. In this way, Xiaohua brandished the wishful steel staff to block the innate real water, and at the same time, hit the pressure that was invisible to the naked eye and approached the location of the jade pearl. Although Xiaohua's eyes couldn't open, the scene of the jade pearl was deeply imprinted in his mind. He saw that there was a space of about 10 feet, and there was no innate primordial water in this space. In the center of this space, there was a bright spot the size of a thumb. This bright brilliance revolved around a blue light spot that was much smaller than a mung bean. The endless pure blue color was born from this blue light spot. This pure blue brilliance shot out about 5 feet, rushed into the innate primordial water, and each brilliance could produce a bubble. In this pure blue light spot, there were also strands of green brilliance shooting out. As soon as these green brilliance shot out, it was immediately absorbed by a flying sword a few feet below the blue brilliance. And under this flying sword, there was a rotating sword array, with a radius of a few feet. Through the countless palm-sized flying swords in the sword array, Xiao Hua saw a small white dragon that was only a few feet in size struggling in pain. Because, at every moment, there was a small flying sword piercing into its body. Although no blood flowed out, the small white dragon would twitch a little, and the shadow on its body would dim a little. Moreover, there seemed to be a rotating vortex above the sword array, which was pointing at the flying sword. While the small white dragon was struggling in pain, it also had to resist the attractive force of the sword array. Tai Wei green light? Xiao Hua's eyes swept over the green light, and his mind reacted very naturally. He knew that this Tai Wei green light was the same as the Tai Yi green light. They were both innate objects, but one was innate gold qi, and the other was innate water qi. However, his eyes only swept over the green light, and his gaze directly fell on the flying sword. The flying swords were very ordinary. Even the flying swords he saw didn't seem to be anything special. However, Xiao Hua knew that this thing was absolutely not ordinary. Even if it's not ordinary, so what? Even if it's used by a swordsman, so what? Xiao Hua did not hesitate to cover it with his hand, and the universe creator covered it. Who knew that just as Xiao Hua's Taoist robe covered it, the flying sword shook slightly, and a brilliant blue sword light was born from the flying sword. With a schwa sound, it was faster than lightning, and stabbed at Xiao Hua's Taoist robe. Kacha! Xiao Hua's heaven and earth sleeve met the sword light with a metallic sound. A strong force that Xiao Hua could not describe, and a kind of sharpness that Xiao Hua's universe creator could not resist came from the sword light. Xiao Hua's Taoist robe was immediately pierced by the sword light, and Xiao Hua's arm was incomparably high. The broken sleeve was like a butterfly fluttering around, and these butterflies fell into a bubble not far away and disappeared in a flash. It was unknown whether it was the butterflies in other people's dreams. Xiao Hua took a breath, gritted his teeth, and said angrily, "Don't say that you're a flying sword. Even if you're a swordsman today, I will still beat you until you vomit blood." With that said, Xiao Hua's bare arms picked up the wishful steel staff with both hands, and hit the flying sword with a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. The flying sword was also powerful. With a slight vibration, several sword lights flew out and blocked the wishful steel staff. The sword lights were so sharp and so powerful that every time Xiao Hua's wishful steel staff was swung away, causing Xiao Hua's qi and blood to surge. Hit! Xiao Hua had never been so overbearing. The heavenly staff technique was displayed, and the wishful steel staff was like a continuous raindrop, hitting the flying sword. Finally, the flying sword that no one commanded was hit by Xiao Hua's wishful steel staff. With a loud, dang sound, a layer of blue brilliance rippled above the flying sword, and the whole flying sword was shocked by the wishful steel staff. Since there was a first time, there was a second time, and a third time. Xiao Hua was like a blacksmith, picking up the wishful steel staff and hitting the flying sword with a ding-dang-dang sound. However, contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, he hit the flying sword dozens of times. His hands and feet were a little weak, but the flying sword was still rippling with blue brilliance, and there was no damage at all. Even the sword array below it did not change. Seeing the blue light fall on the flying sword again, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "Grandma, I thought that the sword array was not easy to break, so I had to start with the flying sword. I did not expect this flying sword to be so powerful. It is worthy of being a flying sword tempered by the blue light. I am afraid that this flying sword can only be used by a swordsman. Humph, in that case, I will also take drastic measures to deal with you." Xiao Hua gritted his teeth and released his mind. He was about to collect the innate jellyfish like the innate mother of gold. Who knew that when his mind came in contact with the innate jellyfish, the endless water light overflowed in his mind, and there was an endless illusion that wanted to lead his mind into it? Xiao Hua was shocked, and he was almost scared out of his wits. He hurriedly collected his mind, and his body was once again covered in cold sweat. No wonder the swordsman did not dare to accept this innate jellyfish. It is much more powerful than the innate mother of gold, Xiaohua thought with lingering fear. Roar! The little white dragon in the sword array seemed to be aware of Xiaohua's trembling. It also let out a sad roar, and its whole body curled up, and its head was tightly tucked into its body. It seemed to have given up resistance, and let Xiaohua escape. How can this be? Xiaohua's heart was filled with sorrow. Little White was his first playmate in the Xiaoyu continent, and Little White also gave him Longyu. It was really good to him. How could he watch as Little White's soul dissipated between heaven and earth? Moreover, the blue light sword obviously wanted to refine Little White into a sword spirit. This blue light sword must be used to kill a swordsman, and maybe Xiaohua himself would also suffer. I'm afraid I can only use this method. If it doesn't work, this young master. Xiaohua sighed slightly. This young master said a few words, but he could not say anything more. In front of absolute power, all words were nothing. Pooh! Xiaohua opened his mouth slightly, and a stream of cold flame was spat out. However, the moment this cold flame touched the light blue brilliance, it was reflected blue, and then melted. It was still blue brilliance. Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He was just testing the waters. Soon after, he opened his mouth slightly and the scarlet-red spiritual fire flew out like a thread, slowly shooting towards the blue light spot. See, the spirit fire's thread passed through the light blue brilliance, as if it had nothing to do with it. Although Xiaohua's eyes were closed, everything was reflected in his mind, and his heart was filled with slight expectation. As expected, the spirit fire did not disappoint him, and without any obstruction, it reached the side of the innate mother of gold. Rap! Xiaohua was overjoyed. He used the fire manipulation art, and the spirit fire nimbly wrapped the innate mother of gold. All the innate primordial water and the blue light were wrapped in the spirit fire. 1. The flying sword let out a sorrowful cry, as if it sensed something wrong. -8. Chapter 24:16. Keep. Xiaohua didn't care how much it was. He released his mind and wrapped the spiritual fire, taking it along with the innate jellyfish into the space. The innate jellyfish that entered the space was the same as the innate gold jellyfish from before. They were all well behaved, without any abnormalities. Good! Xiaohua laughed heartily. The flying sword let out a mournful cry. Suddenly, a dazzling blue sword light flashed. The flying sword turned into a rainbow and rushed toward the fist-sized hole. The sword array under the flying sword also followed. Whitey's soul was caught in the sword array and was forced to fly out. Want to leave? No way! Xiaohua shouted. He did so much and took such a big risk, wasn't it just to save little White's soul? With a wave of his hand, the heaven and earth sleeve was unleashed. The sword array that imprisoned Little White was under Xiaohua's hand. This time, Xiaohua urged all the magic power in his body. Sure enough, the flying sword rushed through Xiaohua's arm, and the sword array under the flying sword was grabbed by Xiaohua's bare arm, on the verge of collapse. Ka! A sword light flew out from the flying sword and slashed towards Xiaohua's arm. Xiaohua naturally didn't dare to be negligent. He waved the wishful staff and hit the sword light. Kacha! The sword light was smashed into thousands of fragments. However, the fragments fell on Xiaohua's arm. Shwa shwa shwa. The fragmented sword light fell like snowflakes, but every crystal sword light slashed across Xiaohua's arm, leaving a scar. This Tai Wei Cyan light sword was actually so powerful. Xiaohua's body, which had been tempered before, was still cut open by its broken sword light. Suddenly a stream of blood flowed out from Xiaohua's arm, dripping down his arm. Xiaohua's physical body hadn't been injured for a long time. He originally thought he could endure this simple sword wound, but when the sharp edge in his flesh seemed to pierce his soul, a numbing sensation that seemed to penetrate deep into his bone marrow transmitted over, he couldn't help but groan. Even his arm faintly trembled, and the magic power in his arm seemed to be on the verge of collapse. How could the supreme light sword be an ordinary flying sword? The wound caused by the sword light was faintly flashing with a light blue color. That blue color was gradually corroding Xiaohua's skin and flesh, gradually enlarging the wound. It even had a tendency to penetrate deep into Xiaohua's heart. Perhaps Xiaohua's only option now was to release the sword array, or perhaps Xiaohua's only option now was to quickly consume a pill to prevent the Supreme Light's invasion. But Xiaohua, can he let go? He will definitely not let go of Xiaohua. Even though the flying sword flew another few feet, the sword formation was still struggling in Xiaohua's hand. The flying sword vibrated again, and an even thicker sword gleam flashed out. This sword gleam was extremely ferocious, and the flying sword must have realized that it was about to fly into a rage out of humiliation. You! Where are you grabbing? Xiaohua knew that his arm was in trouble, but seeing that he was determined, he stretched out his wishful staff and blocked the sword light. At the same time, he struck out horizontally, wanting to borrow the strength of the sword light to send it flying, but at this moment, the sword light suddenly tilted and split into two. One pierced the sword array, and the other pierced Xiaohua's chest. Grandma, is this still a flying sword? Xiaohua was extremely shocked. At this time, he could only choose one, either use the wishful staff to break the flying sword that was piercing the sword array, or block the flying sword that was piercing himself. He had no third choice. For Xiaohua, he only had one choice. He waved his hand, and the wishful staff hit the flying sword that was piercing the sword array. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. As early as when Xiaohua's arm was bleeding, the drops of blood fell into the sword array, and dripped on the soul of the little white dragon that had already dimmed to the extreme. Within the bright red drops of blood, the trace of gold gradually penetrated, and the soul of the little white dragon gradually emitted a faint brilliance. However, this brilliance was too weak, and Xiaohua, who was at the brink of life and death, did not notice it at all. Roar! With a dragon's roar, an extremely brilliant brilliance was born from the sword array. The little white dragon within the sword array suddenly roared and swam rapidly. As it swam, its body turned into a shadow and crashed into a part of the sword array. The flying sword that was piercing the sword array also stopped at this time, and it seemed that it could not find the trace of the little white dragon. Xiaohua was overjoyed when he saw this, and the wishful staff hurriedly pulled back. In a flash, it hit the sword light that was piercing his chest and smashed it into pieces. Immediately, Xiaohua waved the wishful staff again and hit another sword light, which also turned into a firefly falling down. At this time, the flying sword seemed to be hesitating. Xiaohua saw an opportunity and did not dare to neglect it. His figure flew, and he did not dare to relax the spiritual power in his hand. The wishful staff hit the flying sword. Dang! There was another loud sound, and a light blue brilliance rippled on the flying sword. A huge force was born from the flying sword, and Xiaohua's figure was somewhat unstable. Of course, the flying sword was not as good as Xiaohua. It swayed rapidly, as if the flying sword that had left the innate jellyfish had lost its support. Roar! Inside the sword array, there was a louder dragon roar, and the soul of the little white dragon suddenly soared, and soon it was more than a few feet. The sword array of the little white dragon was also expanding. Oh! Xiaohua was surprised and was considering whether to withdraw his heaven and earth sleeve technique. Roar! The little white dragon seemed to know that this was his last chance to escape, and he was also desperate. A series of dragon roars were issued, and all of a sudden, it grew to a size of 10 feet, and the dragon's body was still growing. There was a soft sound, and in the sword array that the little white dragon had found a flaw, there was a crack between the two flying swords. This crack suddenly became the breakthrough point of the sword array's collapse, and the dragon head of the little white dragon suddenly came out of the sword array. Xiaohua was overjoyed, and the staff in his right hand was raised high again, and like a mountain, it hit the supreme light sword. In the face of the whistling wind above the wishful staff, the Tai Wei green light sword flashed a burst of sword light, and then the sword array that imprisoned the little white dragon disappeared, and the Tai-Wei green light sword turned into a blue light, quickly rushed out of the rock pillar and disappeared into the hole. Good. Xiaohua breathed a long sigh of relief and turned to look at the little white dragon. Who would have thought that once the little white dragon escaped from the imprisonment of the sword array, it immediately shrank rapidly. Not only did it return to its previous snake-like appearance, its appearance became even dimmer. It was like the first light of dawn, faintly discernible. Little white! Xiaohua was shocked, and regardless of his injuries, he released his mind and put the little white dragon's soul into his space. However, suddenly Xiaohua thought of another thing, and he took back his mind, returned to the space, and called out Goldie. -8. Chapter 24:17. Sure enough, the moment Goldie saw Whitey's soul, it immediately woke up. The yellow fur on its body suddenly stood up, and even its huge tail stood straight up. Xiaobai was also shocked. Roar! It struggled and swayed with difficulty. Sigh! Xiaohua didn't have time to say anything to Xiaohuang and hurriedly put it back into the space. Xiaohuang feeds on souls and cores. Xiaobai is also a soul. Naturally, we can't put them together. Xiaohua was in a difficult position. And in my space, I can't control it right now. What should I do? If I had a Dharma body before, I could try to send it in. Can the Buddha Sarira succeed? Xiaohua thought of his Buddha fire. Will the Buddha fire burn Xiaobai to death? Xiaohua hesitated again. Let's try it. However, when Xiaohua wrapped his mind around Xiaobai, there was another problem. His mind seemed to be completely unable to sense Xiaobai's soul. Oh, Xiaobai is a soul. It's not a tangible thing. My mind can't collect it. Right, don't I have soul strands? When Xiaohua saw that little white dragon's soul was about to dissipate, he didn't dare to think about it anymore. He quickly pulled out the soul thread from his heaven ring and wrapped it around little white dragon. Little white dragon, who was bound by the soul thread, panicked. It didn't understand what was happening and struggled with all its strength. Seeing little white struggle, Xiaohua originally didn't care about it. However, a strong force was transmitted from the soul strand, pulling his soul strand by a lot in an instant. Xiaohua didn't find it strange. The soul also has strength. However, Xiaohua couldn't communicate with Xiaobai. He could only tap his forehead and make some gestures with his hands. He didn't know if Xiaobai could understand. Moreover, Xiaohua released even more soul strands. Xiaobai didn't know if it saw Xiaohua's gestures or if it understood. It didn't have too many methods to struggle. After struggling for a while, it gave up and could only let Xiaohua ravage it. Xiaohua carefully pulled back the strand of soul force, but this strand of soul force was different from when he was using a soul armament. He could feel that Xiaobai's soul was extremely heavy, as if he was dragging a large object. Xiaohua somewhat understood. Dual cultivation techniques emphasize soul remembrance and soul power, but this technique of mine is half-baked and I didn't really focus on it, so I didn't really understand it before. Now, he knew that even though the soul was invisible to the naked eye and spiritual will, it was still an incorporeal being. However, to the soul strands, they were tangible objects. Although Whitey's soul had already dimmed and was on the verge of collapse, it still had weight to the soul strands. My soul strands. And my own soul cultivation technique is only at the heaven-encompassing soul, which should be the beginning of soul cultivation. The soul power of my soul strands is also very weak. Or maybe my soul power is weak, so my soul strands don't have much strength. However, in any case, Xiaohua still had soul strands and had some soul power. As he moved bit by bit, little white dragon's soul actually passed through the magic eye imprint, and slowly entered that mysterious place. Seeing Xiaohua's enormous mysterious dark cloud and the faint rumbling of thunder within the dark cloud, little white dragon was extremely alarmed. However, smelling the sweet smell of black silk wood in that mysterious place, little white dragon was a bit excited and opened its dragon mouth, opening and closing it. Oh! Seeing this, Xiaohua retracted his soul strands into the heaven-encompassing soul and took out the black silk wood. Ho! Little white dragon was happy and slowly swam around the black silk wood as if it was extremely enjoying it. And so this black silk wood is not only useful for soul cultivation techniques, it's also useful for Whitey's soul. Xiaohua thought to himself, and then retracted the black silk wood back into the heaven-encompassing soul. Seeing the black silk would move into the dark cloud, Little White's soul also chased under the dark cloud, but seeing the enormous dark cloud, it was abnormally afraid. You come in too! Xiaohua's soul strands reached out again and wrapped around Little White Dragon's soul. However, Little White Dragon was still afraid and used all its strength to struggle, as if the dark cloud was a dragon's pool and tiger's den. Once it entered, its life would be in danger. You come in! Xiaohua was a bit anxious. His soul strands tightly wrapped around Little White, and Little White was indeed exhausted, and didn't struggle anymore. In the end, it was pulled into the heaven-encompassing soul by Xiaohua. Xiaohua actually didn't know the danger of this action. Not only for Little White Dragon, but even for himself, it was also extremely inappropriate. The soul has always been a cultivator's vital point. Even if the body enters the cycle of reincarnation, the soul is also the last thing one can rely on. Xiaohua actually allowed Little White Dragon's soul to enter his own soul. On one hand, Little White's life and death is already under his control. His soul can transform Little White's soul into his own soul with a thought. On the other hand, if Little White's soul is stronger than Xiaohua's soul, it will inevitably cause harm to Xiaohua's soul. Even if the two of them coexist peacefully, Xiaohua's soul will still cause harm to Little White's soul. Xiaohua was ignorant and didn't know. Although Little White knew, it was no match for Xiaohua's fierceness, and could only feel wrong. Since ancient times, there were no better people than this who did bad things with good intentions. However, fortunately, when Little White's soul arrived at the heaven of surrounding aura, the entire heaven of surrounding aura was filled with the rich black silk wood qi, and Xiaohua's primordial spirit slowly swam inside, slowly emitting fluctuations. Little White Dragon immediately understood. Thank you? A timid, extremely tired, and extremely small voice was transmitted to Xiaohua's mind. Little White? Is that you? Xiaohua was already familiar with Little White's voice transmission and replied very naturally. Little White? That voice was a little happy and a little confused. Damn, that's right! Xiaohua was greatly embarrassed. Little White was just his own wishful thinking. Little White still didn't know. I'm called Little White. What's your name? I'm called Xiaohua. I gave you the name Little White. If you don't like it, then forget it. What's your name? Xiaohua said very apologetically. My name. At this point, Little White was a little heavy and seemed to be even more hesitant. Just call me Little White. Xiaohua, you must not devour. Little White. Don't worry, Little White, I won't. Xiaohua simply didn't know what devouring was and immediately comforted it. You should first recuperate here. When your soul condenses, I will let you out. I'm tired. Little White's voice became even smaller. Thank you? Xiaohua. Xiaohua was just about to reply when he saw Little White close its eyes. Its soul also slightly danced in the heaven ring of qi, and the surrounding black silk wood's aura also swarmed over. All right, let it recover. Xiaohua's heart was greatly relieved and slowly retreated from the heaven ring of qi. At this time, within the stone pillar, there was already no dazzling blue brilliance, only rich innate true water. However, around Xiaohua, there were still some gaps that the innate true water had not flooded. Of course, this gap was also slowly shrinking. Only now did Xiaohua have the heart to look at the injury on his left arm. He saw that the place where the blue light lingered previously had already been devoured by the golden threads in Xiaohua's blood. Not only did the blood not flow, the sword scar also showed signs of recovery. And body cultivators really have an advantage in healing injuries. Perhaps those beast cultivators chose to cultivate with spirit beasts because of their strong self-healing ability? Thinking about this, Xiaohua took out the wishful staff and was about to rush out of the innate true water, preparing to leave through the hole in the stone pillar. However, Xiaohua's eyes lit up when he saw the boundless primordial water. With a wave of his hand, he took out the mist pearl that Dui Miaoqing had given him. After that, he gave Dui Miaoqing's storage pouch a simple look and took out the jade slip for refining the mist pearl. Xiaohua immersed his divine sense in it and looked for a moment. He knew that the refining of the tide bead was similar to that of the blue water bead, and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He did not need to completely refine the tide bead, he only needed to slightly control it. Immediately, Xiaohua did not delay. He urged his magic power and cast a few refining spells on it. In just a moment, the tide bead emitted a faint blue light again. Go! Xiaohua did not hesitate. He pointed his finger, and the misty tide pearl rushed into the Xiantian primordial water. Instantly, a tiny whirlpool appeared above the misty tide pearl, and the Xiantian primordial water poured into the misty tide pearl like a swarm of bees. Hee hee, Xiaohua laughed sinisterly. There was so much innate true water in the stone pillar, if he did not take it now, he did not know who would benefit from it in the future. After absorbing the innate true water, the tide bead's brilliance became more and more brilliant. It grew bigger and bigger until it was more than a foot long. The blue brilliance was dazzling, and there was a layer of blue halo around it. It was really hazy like the tide. However, at this time, the innate true water in the stone pillar's space had only decreased by 30%. The quality of this tide bead is also not good. Xiaohua smacked his lips. He was really regretful in his heart. Immediately, Xiaohua took out the magic tool that could hold liquid that Xin Shu gave him. That magic tool also contained snake venom, which was also very precious. Xiaohua had no choice but to put it into the space. Seeing that he did not have such a magic tool, Xiaohua looked at Dui Miaoqing's storage pouch. However, when Xiaohua was looking for the jade slips earlier, there were a few magic tools inside, but they did not look like they could hold liquid. Xiaohua could only look for the storage pouches left behind by Dui Hui and the others. Great! When Xiaohua took out a 1-foot-long cyan jade bottle from the storage pouch of a bald cultivator with great difficulty, he could not help but smile brilliantly. This jade bottle was thin and long, and there was a grain-sized gap at the mouth of the bottle. Moreover, there were some cracks on the body of the jade bottle. It was unknown whether the jade bottle itself was different, or the jade bottle was damaged. However, when Xiaohua took out the jade slips from the cultivator's storage pouch, he was somewhat dumbstruck. This was because in addition to the jade slips, there were also a few golden leaves inside the storage pouch. They were exactly the same as the golden centipede that Kunlun Sex Hanju gave him. -8. Chapter 24:18. Could this cultivator be a Buddhist disciple? Xiaohua hadn't heard any news about the Buddhist sect for a long time. When he suddenly saw it here, he was shocked. That bastard Han Zhu gave me a small golden Buddha and told me to use my Buddhist sense to examine it when I'm in the late foundation establishment stage. He wants to take me to the ruins of the Buddhist sect. Damn, this young master is doing well in the Tao sect. Why would I go to the ruins of the Buddhist sect? Forget it, let's not talk about him. Let's see how to use this magic tool first. Xiaohua placed several golden puppets into the Buddha Saraira and looked through them one by one. When he saw one of the golden pages, he suddenly stopped. After waiting for another incense stick's worth of time, Xiaohua opened his eyes and put the golden puppets into his space. He glanced at the jade bottle and said with a smile, "So this is a Buddhist magic tool called the clear water bottle. It's said to be able to hold the water of 100 rivers. Come, let this young master see if this clear water bottle meets this young master's wishes." While speaking, Xiaohua took out the Buddha Saraira and saw a faint golden light sprinkle all over. Xiaohua then threw the clear water bottle in front of the Buddha Saraira. The Buddha Saraira put its palms together, one hand pointing to the sky and the other pointing to the ground. Its face was full of compassion. Lin, the Buddha Sarira lightly chanted, and a Sanskrit incantation flew out and landed on the clear water bottle. Soon after, a hazy and indistinct figure flew out from the clear water bottle and landed in front of the Buddha Sarira. After slightly cupping its hands, it turned into a light smoke and disappeared. Soon after, Xiaohua's Buddhist sense was on the clear water bottle. According to the method described in the golden puppet, he refined the clear water bottle bit by bit. The refining method of this Buddhist magic tool seems to be somewhat similar to the island guarding token of Sunset Island, Xiaohua thought to himself when he saw the Buddhist light on the clear water bottle disappear in a flash. Behind the golden puppet, there were naturally many golden puppet records regarding the use of the clear water bottle. However, Xiaohua was impatient and didn't dare to stay any longer. He only wanted to see how to refine and activate the clear water bottle to collect true water. The method of controlling this Buddhist artifact is different from that of a magic artifact. It requires the use of Buddha seals to drive psychokinesis. Xiaohua only cultivated the Buddha Sarira in a daze. How could he know what psychokinesis is? Helpless, Xiaohua tossed the water bottle into the air like a basic magic tool of the Tao sect. First, he habitually pointed at it with his hand as if he was urging his magic power. Then, he suddenly realized something and hurriedly formed a Buddhist seal with his hand. The Buddhist seal was somewhat similar to a spell, so it wasn't too difficult for Xiaohua. However, the Buddhist seal was formed, but what about the power of thought? Who the hell knows where it is? However, the strange thing was that as the pure water bottle tilted slightly, a very gentle suction force was produced from the pure water bottle. It was even softer than the wind as it slowly floated towards the innate primordial water. Although the suction force was gentle, as soon as it came into contact with the innate primordial water, all the bubbles and other things were sucked into the pure water bottle. It was even more efficient than the tidal beads. The Buddha's heart is merciful and emphasizes on helping those who are fated. This Buddhist artifact is also the same. It doesn't have any smoke or fire. Although it's extremely gentle, it also can't be resisted. Xiaohua seemed to have understood something, but he was also extremely confused. But I didn't control this pure water bottle. How could this primordial water? Forget it, isn't it good to be able to collect it? Let's talk about it later. That Buddhist artifact pure water bottle was indeed powerful. In less than 2 hours, more than 90% of the innate primordial water in the stone pillar had been absorbed. Okay. Don't absorb anymore. Leave some for the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain. Xiaohua was grinning from ear to ear. This Buddhist artifact was really to his liking. Seeing that this several thousand feet wide area was empty, the remaining innate primordial water was divided into 2 parts and gathered on both sides of the stone pillar. It slowly turned into a light blue brilliance and seeped out of the stone pillar. Xiaohua hurriedly used his Buddhist consciousness to control the pure water bottle and collected it. Let's go! Xiaohua was perfectly satisfied. He clapped his hands and once again drilled out of the fist-sized hole. Ouch! However, Xiaohua was indeed a little too pleased with himself. When he flew out, he forgot to maintain his balance. In a moment of carelessness, he was sucked in by the powerful force outside the stone pillar. His body involuntarily flew towards the top of the spindle. Oh! Forget it! Xiaohua just wanted to resist, but when he saw the cliff above the abyss, he laughed. Isn't it the same as going out? Let's go from here! This was practically the feeling of falling from the top of a waterfall. In the beginning, it was still somewhat slow, but as he fell and the water flow became stronger, his speed became faster and faster. However, at this moment Xiaohua was sliding down from the middle of the stone pillar. This kind of feeling really gave Xiaohua a kind of illusion, a kind of strange feeling. Hong! A loud and clear sound rang out. Like 100 rivers returning to the sea, countless light blue rays of light rushed into the rock wall. Xiaohua, who had already used the earth escape technique, also entered the rock wall. Ouch! Something's wrong! Just as Xiaohua's body sank into the rock wall, a wave of scorching heat rushed into Xiaohua's body from the rock wall. This heat not only attacked Xiaohua's meridians, but also rushed into his blood vessels and bones. Xiaohua's body could be said to have been tempered thousands of times. In an instant, it was somewhat difficult for him to endure. The primordial spirit inside the bone thread immediately increased the speed of the bone tempering technique. A faint orange brilliance slowly emerged. While resisting the scorching heat, it protected Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua's entire body was in endless pain. That scorching heat was simply like millions of black iron needles piercing into Xiaohua's body. It was as if Xiaohua was sent to the ninth heaven and was being baked under the sun. Even though Xiaohua had practiced the fire escape technique, even though Xiaohua had been tempered by the origin of fire, this kind of yang qi between heaven and earth still made Xiaohua want to die. Xiaohua didn't know how much time had passed, and he didn't know how far he had been swept away by the torrent. Suddenly, Xiaohua felt a cool breeze coming from his feet. Although this cool breeze was faint, it was like a sweet rain from the nine heavens. It made him feel like he had just escaped from prison. Great! I've finally endured it! Xiaohua was very happy. However, just as this joy was born, that cool breeze enveloped his entire body and actually turned into a powerful suction force. Ah? Where am I going? Xiaohua stared blankly. Very habitually, he swept out his divine sense and couldn't help but be shocked. He saw that he was still inside the rock wall, but about 10 zhang away from the rock wall, a huge red-skinned gourd was precisely aimed at him. That cool and suction force was emitted from the mouth of that gourd. You're courting death! Xiaohua was furious. He didn't have time to look elsewhere. With a flick of his right hand, the universe in the sleeve was used from his still intact Taoist robe. In an instant, that red-skinned gourd was covered, and without hesitation, he easily sucked it into his own space. Who? An extremely shocked voice came from above. -8. Chapter 24:19. At this time, Xiaohua had rushed out of the rock wall. He was much faster than a flying sword as he rushed into the air. Ha ha ha, of course it's this young master! Xiaohua's figure flipped a few times in the air. His divine sense swept through the entire space and he laughed loudly. This was an underground space that was several times larger than the space of the rock pillars. There was a faint brilliance on the surrounding rock walls. The place where Xiaohua had rushed out from was a place that looked like a spout. There were countless places like this in the entire space. 3 illusory swordsmen were standing around the mouth of the fountain. These illusory swordsmen were all baffled. Their faces were filled with disbelief. And how could a Tao sect disciple suddenly rush out of this place? Moreover, it was a foundation establishment disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Even their red-skinned gourd had suddenly disappeared. Xiaohua had a complacent smile on his face. His divine sense swept through these illusory swordsmen. However, when his gaze fell on the 7 corpses of Tao sect disciples lying crookedly around the spout, his face unconsciously turned cold. Fortunately, although 2 of these 7 Tao sect disciples were from the Xuanyan school, Xiao Mao was not among them. These illusory swordsmen were not bystanders. They were the illusory swordsmen who had come to the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain after attacking the Xuanyan school's spirit stone mine. Except for Liao Qinkong of the Flying Feather sect, whom Xiaohua had previously used his Buddhist consciousness to peek at in the Gale snowfield, he did not recognize the other 2. They were Zhong Haoshuan and Bai Jie of the Bright Sword sect. They had come to the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain for no other reason than the Yin-Yang sword spirit that they had promised to the Black Phoenix Sword sect's LV Ruochang 5 years ago. Back then, Zhong Haoshuan had already gotten a clue about the 2 Yin and Yang sword spirits, and he had successfully nurtured the 2 sword spirits a year later. But these 2 sword spirits were too weak, and the Clear Sword sect didn't have 2 disciples with excellent physiques to nurture these 2 sword spirits. Thus, Zhong Haoshuan had set his sights on Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain. However, at that time, the Spirit Stone Mine formation had become more and more intense. Ling Yunwu and the others had died in an accident, causing the various sects to panic. Even the Clear Sword sect had their own missions and didn't dare to send extra people to Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain. Moreover, if they didn't have suitable sword cultivator disciples to nurture the sword spirits, they would need suitable blood essence. The Clear Sword sect wasn't willing to lose their own disciples, so they set their sights on the Dao sect disciples. Searching for these disciples took several years until recently, when Guan Ping invited the Clear Sword sect disciples to attack Xunyan School's Spirit Stone mine. One of Zhong Haoshuan's conditions was to find suitable disciples with suitable physiques to use as blood sacrifices. But what surprised Zhong Haoshuan was that the Yang sword spirit had already undergone the blood sacrifice, and the sword spirit within the sword gourd had clearly been nurtured, absorbing the Yang Qi underground. Suddenly, the sword gourd disappeared. Moreover, a Thunder Control sect disciple had inexplicably rushed out. How could he not fly into a rage? Kill! What else did Zhong Haoshuan need to say? If Xiaohua hadn't appeared, he really wouldn't have known the whereabouts of the sword gourd. But Xiaohua had already flown out. Even if his Taoist robe was somewhat shabby, with one sleeve missing and revealing his bare arms, who could say that a sleeveless hand couldn't conveniently steal melons? But following Zhong Haoshuan's furious roar, a flying sword that was like a scorching sun flew out from under his feet. This scorching sun sword was exceptionally ferocious within this Yang Qi, illuminating the entire space. A whistling sword wind, a trace of sword light that could pierce into Xiaohua's body, and a kind of earth-shattering confinement force that tightly suppressed Xiaohua's body in midair, all came from that scorching sun. Zhong Haoshuan's first move was the scorching sun sword. He didn't want to repeat Ling Yunwu's mistakes, even though he didn't know who killed Ling Yunwu. Ouch! Seeing such a powerful flying sword, Xiaohua's face turned pale with fright. He hurriedly urged his flying technique with all his might, wanting to escape from the confinement of the scorching sun sword. However, no matter how he urged his magic power, he could only fly about a foot away from the sword intent, and was immediately enveloped by the scorching sun sword. Humph! Seeing that Xiaohua actually had magic power to struggle, Zhong Haoshuan's face revealed a trace of a smile. He was only an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, so what if he could struggle? If he couldn't struggle, Zhong Haoshuan would be a little surprised. The scorching sun sword was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it pierced Xiaohua's chest. Seeing that the brilliance in the air was converging in one place, and was about to sink into Xiaohua's chest, Zhong Haoshuan's face finally relaxed a little. At this moment, Xiaohua suddenly waved his hand, and a 2-foot-long wishful staff appeared. His figure flashed and hit the scorching sun sword with incomparable speed. The huge force on the sword light caused Xiaohua's figure to stagger, and he really flew to Liao Qingkong's side. Liao Qingkong's face showed a trace of surprise, but his hands were still tucked in the sword armor, and he looked indifferent. Ha ha! Hit! Xiaohua's back was facing Liao Qingkong. When he was about 2 feet away, he suddenly turned around and raised his wishful staff. With a loud shout, he hit Liao Qingkong's forehead. Seeing that Xiaohua's wishful staff was stirring up the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, Liao Qingkong laughed. At the same time, his feet leaped, and his figure flew into the air. He laughed and said, "I was waiting for you to launch a sneak attack. I didn't expect you to really come." It turned out that Liao Qingkong had already seen through Xiaohua's sneak attack plan. Oh, not good! When Xiaohua saw Liao Qingkong fly out, his arms were exposed from the sword armor. His silver-white arms were obviously different from those of other sword cultivators. He couldn't help but turn pale with fright. His figure wanted to escape and attack another disciple of the Clear Sword sect. "Since you want to attack this old man, don't leave!" Liao Qingkong smiled proudly, and a huge fist rushed toward Xiaohua. Seeing that Liao Qingkong was only a few feet away from Xiaohua, and that the fist was also close to Xiaohua, Xiaohua suddenly laughed. "This young master also doesn't plan to leave?" As he spoke, the somewhat crooked wishful staff suddenly became thick, and with a woo sound, it smashed towards Liao Qingkong's arm. Seeing Xiaohua smile, Liao Qinkong also sneered. The wishful staff gave him a feeling of surging wind and clouds, but he believed in his fist more. Besides, the scorching sun sword was already behind Xiaohua. As long as he blocked Xiaohua's staff, the scorching sun sword would be able to pierce Xiaohua's back. Dang! With a loud sound, a heart-wrenching pain came from his fist. It was a pain that he had never experienced since he mastered the technique. After the pain, his arm was numb, and he couldn't feel anything at all. This numbness not only numbed his arm, but also his whole body in an instant. Looking at Xiaohua again, he slightly waved the wishful staff in his hand. The head of the staff that hit Liao Qinkong's fist immediately turned into the tail of the staff. The tail of the staff became the head of the staff, and it smashed towards Liao Qinkong's forehead like a bolt of lightning. Liao Jianyu, dodge! Zhong Haoshuan shouted in the distance. Run! This shout really woke Liao Qinkong up. Sword light flashed on his body, and his figure quickly escaped. Ha ha ha! Do you think you can escape? Xiaohua's figure was even faster. In just a flash, he stuck to Liao Qinkong's body, and the wishful staff hit Liao Qinkong's forehead with a poof sound. Needless to say, Liao Qinkong's fist was shattered by the wishful staff. As for his forehead, there was no need to mention it. Hiss! Zhong Haoshuan sucked in a breath of cold air. His eyes were wide open as he watched Liao Qinkong's headless corpse fall. He was shocked. Feng Duan, you! What is your relationship with Feng Buping? Are you out of your mind? Xiaohua's figure spread out. He didn't avoid the scorching sun sword at all. Instead, he flew a few feet closer. The wishful staff in his hand once again struck out like a thunderbolt. With a crisp sound, the brilliance of the scorching sun sword splashed in all directions. Bai Jia, come and help me! Zhong Haoshuan was shocked. He really didn't expect it to be a blow that didn't move forward. Moreover, the power of the wishful staff was actually something that the scorching sun sword couldn't resist. Bai Jia was a grade 1 illusory swordsman. Seeing that Liao Qinkong was easily killed by Xiaohua and that Zhong Haoshuan's flying sword was also damaged in the blink of an eye, his heart was already trembling with fear. When he heard Zhong Haoshuan calling for him, he immediately urged the flying sword under his feet to rush over. Chi la la! A lightning-like flying sword flew out from Bai Jia's feet and attacked Xiaohua. Ha ha ha! Xiaohua laughed. If it was any other flying sword, Xiaohua would still have to think for a moment, but this was the lightning sword, so he didn't have any burden at all. Attack! Xiaohua's left hand pulled the wishful staff. While attacking Zhong Haoshuan, his right hand was empty, and he urged his spiritual power to cast the thunder palm. Moreover, what was even more insidious was that after the thunder palm, Xiaohua's spiritual power didn't stop at all. He urged it again, and the heaven and earth sleeve technique came out one after another. Kacha! A lightning much thicker than the lightning sword emerged from Xiaohua's hand and blocked the lightning sword. Ah? You are the terrifying phoenix of the Imperial Thunder Sect? Seeing the thick lightning, Bai Jia suddenly thought of something and was extremely horrified. Terrifying? Terrifying phoenix? His voice didn't matter, but Zhong Haoshuan was also shocked. After all, his thoughts were the same as Feng Buping's. The reputation of this terrifying phoenix was really quite resounding. It didn't matter if Zhong Haoshuan was shocked, but Bai Jia was dumbfounded. Just as he roared out, he felt a shackling force that he was almost unable to resist enveloping him. He lost his head out of fear, disregarding the thunder light sword that was blocked by Xiaohua's thunder palm, and tried his best to break free. In fact, he was a first-grade illusory swordsman. Xiaohua's heaven and earth sleeve could certainly imprison him. As long as he used the lightning sword, he could also break this imprisonment force. However, when he struggled, the sword's spirit in his mouth spurted out. It was not easy to break free from the heaven and earth sleeve. Moreover, when he just broke free from the imprisonment force, he suddenly felt a tingling pain in his Naiwen palace. The sword's spirit was also not flowing smoothly. His figure stagnated and fell from midair. However, this was not the worst-case scenario. Just when he wanted to resist, the most frightening thing happened. A stronger wind than the imprisonment force just now pressed down from the top of his head. The wind was full of killing intent and sharpness. -8. Chapter 24:20. Ah! Bai Jie was shocked. Just as he raised his head slightly, he saw that Xiao Hua's staff, which was originally aimed at Zhong Haoshuan, was now only 3 feet away from his head. The 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel was an ancient weapon that did not belong to the 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel. Although Xiao Hua's Wishful Heaven Cudgel was far less powerful than the 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel, he was facing a Grade 1 illusory swordsman like Bai Jie. Moreover, under a series of calculations such as the world in the sleeve and soul stab, the distance of 3 feet was covered in a flash. Bai Jie screamed as the Wishful Heaven Cudgel hit his forehead. With the same muffled sound, Bai Jie's head was broken like a gourd. Ha ha ha, Xiao Hua laughed. His figure did not stop at all. He turned his head and used wind escape to force Zhong Haoshuan. Zhong Haoshuan took a breath, his eyes narrowed tightly. He gritted his teeth, and his whole body flashed with a strong brilliance, like a hedgehog with a long brilliance. Terrifying Phoenix, this old man did not expect to meet you here. Since you have appeared, Ling Yunwu and the others must have died. They can't keep you, then let this old man keep you. Zhong Haoshuan enunciated each word clearly. The scorching sun sword also suddenly released a sword beam that soared into the sky. Zhong Haoshuan opened his mouth and spat out his sword essence. It fell into the scorching sun sword, and Zhong Haoshuan's figure flashed extremely quickly, transforming into a flying sword. Kill! Zhong Haoshuan said the last word of his life. His entire body landed on the flying sword. The brilliance of the flying sword that was already soaring into the sky became even more dazzling. It was truly like a rising sun. Moreover, a tragic feeling of mutual destruction blossomed from the sun. That blossoming death aura was like the rain lotus that Xiao Hua saw on the ice lake that day. It was extremely dazzling, and it blossomed petal by petal. Ha ha ha, Xiao Hua laughed. With a wave of his hands, Zhong Haoshuan, who had turned into a sword, suddenly felt a burning sensation all around him. Samadhi True Fire! Zhong Haoshuan's gradually blurred consciousness was shocked, but he saw a circle of pure purple Samadhi True Fire burning around the scorching sun flying sword. In fact, the surrounding masculine energy was also ignited, and more fireballs than Zhong Haoshuan formed around him. Zhong Haoshuan's heart was like dead ashes. He absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua to actually know the true Samadhi fire. He absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua to have such an exquisite fire control technique. He also absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua to add fuel to the fire at this time, drawing out the secret technique he originally wanted to activate ahead of time. Boom! With a loud sound, the entire space shook. Sword light overflowed in all directions, and sparks shot in all directions. However, this explosion wasn't aimed at Xiao Hua. It only exploded on the spot. The damage it dealt to Xiao Hua, could be ignored. When the flame gradually disappeared, Xiao Hua flew over from an extremely far place. The instant of the explosion was enough for Xiao Hua to fly extremely far away. Alas! Xiao Hua looked at the mess on the ground, shook his head and said, "It's really a pity, an illusory swordsman transformed into a flying sword." Then, Xiao Hua landed on the ground and looked at the 7 Dao sect disciples who were killed earlier. Their corpses had been scattered by Zhong Haoshuan's explosion, but Bai Jie and Liao Qingkong's corpses were still intact. Xiao Hua reached out and took the 2 people's storage bags. After searching for a moment, he found a sword bamboo slip. He immersed his divine sense in it for a moment, and sneered. "They deserve to die. They actually sacrificed the lives of my Dao sect disciples to the sword spirit. This kind of sword spirit is also extremely tyrannical. How can it be used? I'm afraid the Dao of the sword has been defeated again, right? However, I still want to go and see whether Xiao Mao is still alive in this world. Even if he's dead, I will avenge him." Xiao Hua laughed sinisterly. His figure flew up using the wind escape technique, and rushed out quickly along the route drawn in the sword bamboo's slip. This was an underground space that was thousands of feet in size, similar to the space where Zhong Haoshuan and the others sacrificed the red-skinned gourd sword spirit. However, the scene within was completely different. On the top of the rock wall that was tens of thousands of feet tall, countless six-petal crystals were connected to each other. Faint blue light faintly flowed over them. As this light flickered between the 6 petals of the crystal, an incomparably cold aura was emitted. The threads of aura passed through the crystal and disappeared into the rock wall. Not a trace of it could be seen. Moreover, between these countless 6-petaled crystals, there were circular crystal pillars that were a few feet or 10 feet in size. They were directly inserted into the rock wall, and their whereabouts were unknown. Looking at the entire space, the faint blue light was like a gem that was constantly blooming, filling the entire space. This blue light was extremely cold, and there were fine rays of light that were born from all over the space. These fine rays of light did not fall to the ground, but instead rushed into the rock wall at the top of the space with the brilliance, and turned into little crystals. The extremely cold, faint blue light came from under the space, from the sharp tips of the rock spikes that rose from the ground. These rock spikes were extremely similar to the stone bells that were usually hung upside down in caves. They were milky white in color, and on the sharp rock spikes, thumb-sized fluorescent lights flashed brightly, similar to the stone stalactites that dripped from the top of the stone bells. However, when the stone stalactites dripped to the ground, the thumb-sized fluorescent light blue light pierced into the air, spreading throughout the entire space. In a corner of this strange and cold space, a green-skinned bottle gourd was faintly emitting a green-blue light. It was even vibrating rhythmically. The mouth of the gourd was facing down, facing a huge rock spike. A faint blue light that could be seen with the naked eye covered the tip of the rock spike, and the blue light from the fluorescent lights mixed into the green light and was absorbed by the green gourd. Looking at the surroundings of the huge rock spike, there were 7 Dao sect cultivators lying on the ground. 5 of them had already died. The faces of these 5 corpses were all bruised, and their faces were twisted with pain. This ferocious expression was frozen on their faces, as if their bodies had been frozen by some kind of coldness. Beside the 5 corpses, there were still 2 cultivators. One was a white-haired female cultivator, and the other was Xiao Mao, whose face was slightly weathered, and whose eyes were filled with viciousness. The 2 of them sat cross-legged on the ground. Their bodies flickered with a faint protective light. On the surface of the protective light, there was a thin layer of icy blue. Within the icy blue, crystalline light could be vaguely seen. If it weren't for this protective light, Xiao Mao and the female cultivator would have been frozen into popsicles like the corpses of the other 5 cultivators. However, Xiao Mao and the female cultivator couldn't move at all. Within the cold blue, there were several sword lights that moved like poisonous snakes and firmly restrained the 2 of them. Above Xiao Mao's head, next to the green gourd, stood 3 sword cultivators. One of them was someone Xiao Hua had seen on the Gale Snow Plains. It was the bird cultivator from the Quilted Mountain sect, Yu Ming, who had appeared with Feng Buping. The other 2 were the female cultivators of the Clear Sword sect, Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing. At this time, Yu Ming was standing high up with his hands crossed. There was no light around him to resist the extreme cold. There was a hint of arrogance in his eyes as he coldly looked at the actions of the 2 female cultivators who were only grade 1 illusory sword cultivators. Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing both had their eyes closed. Their sword robes were a bit messy at this time, and their exposed skin showed a green luster. This luster reflected the white hair on their heads, giving them a different kind of charm. However, the expressions on their faces were not relaxed at all. The corners of their eyes twitched slightly as if they were suppressing something. The 2 of them each stood on a flying sword. One of the sword lights was snow green, while the other was sky blue. The sword lights flashed and rushed into their bodies from time to time. Every time the sword lights flashed, their expressions became a bit better. At this time, the green gourd suddenly swelled. Not only did it emit a bright light, but an inexplicable fluctuation also spread out. "Junior Sister Feng, it's time," Let's prepare for the sixth blood sacrifice. Zhong Mingtian's face showed a kind of excitement. He suddenly opened his eyes and said to Feng Qing. Feng Qing also showed a touch of blush on her face. She nodded and said, I will listen to senior sister's orders. Senior Yu. Zhong Mingtian raised his head and bowed to Yu Ming and said, Senior, please protect us. His tone was unusually respectful. He was not rude because Yu Ming was only grade 2 illusory sword cultivator. I know. You all can cast the spell. Yu Ming nodded proudly. Yes. Zhong Mingtian clapped his hand and a blood-red talisman appeared in his hand. This talisman was very strange. It did not look like a yellow talisman. It was shaped like a skeleton, but it was the size of a palm. The talisman on it was also strange. It faintly emitted a dark green light, and it was somewhat similar to the green seal script. Go, Zhong Mingtian threw the talisman into the air and formed a sword seal with his hand. A snow-green sword light flashed under his feet and a snowflake-like brilliance landed on the talisman. With a "see" sound, the brilliance actually ignited the talisman. The dark green flame burned the talisman into a ball of fire the size of a wicker basket. The talisman symbols in the ball of fire spun rapidly and a burst of ghostly wails and howls could be heard from the ball of fire. Junior Sister Feng. Zhong Mingtian saw the ball of fire rising and said anxiously, The soul talisman has been activated. Quickly capture the Taoist sect cultivators. Yes. On the other side, Feng Qing was already prepared. With a grab of her hand, the white-haired female cultivator was sent flying into the air. She couldn't move at all. Kill! A trace of ruthlessness flashed in Feng Qing's eyes. The flying sword under her feet suddenly flew out and turned into a foot-long ice needle. It quickly pierced into the female cultivator's forehead. The flying sword was abnormally sharp. It sank into the female cultivator's forehead the moment it touched it. A drop of dirty blood flowed out from the wound on her forehead. Quick, Senior Sister Zhong! Feng Qing quickly formed a sword seal. Suddenly, the flying sword on the female cultivator's forehead turned into a sword light and retreated. Quick, Zhong Mingtian was also fast. He pointed with his finger, and the ball of fire also rushed toward the blood on the female cultivator's forehead at an extremely fast speed. It rushed into the female cultivator's forehead before Feng Qing's flying sword left, and the arrow of blood spurted out. -8. Chapter 24-21. Who, seeing the dark green fireball enter the female cultivator's forehead, the female cultivator's face immediately showed extreme pain. Her facial features were all twisted, and even a dark green color appeared. Feng Qing's eyes flashed with lingering fear, followed by a flash of red. She knew in her heart that the soul talisman was refining the female cultivator's soul in her mind. That kind of pain was definitely not something a living person could experience. Once her soul was extracted by the soul talisman, this female cultivator's life would come to an end. There would be no reincarnation, no future. Heh. Suddenly, the female cultivator stretched out her four limbs, and a great power was born from her body. The sword light that was binding her broke apart inch by inch, and the light blue brilliance also turned into fluorescent light that scattered in all directions. Senior Yu! Seeing this, Zhong Mingtian's face was shocked, but his eyes flashed with joy. He knew that this was because the soul talisman had stimulated the female cultivator's yin water attribute potential at the end of the refinement process. This potential was exactly what was needed to refine the green gourd sword spirit. And Yu Ming didn't care at all. His arms suddenly shook, and 2 10-feet-long wings grew out from his back. That pale blue light mixed with white fluorescent light came from the feathers of his wings. Caw! Yu Ming's voice turned into a bird's cry. His wings also flapped a few times, and that light flew out from between his wings. The light flew in the air like thorns, and the pale blue light became more and more intense. When it flew in front of the female cultivator who was violently twisting her four limbs, it had become an inch-long thorn. Poo-pee-you! Almost at the same time, all the thorns pierced into the female cultivator's body at the same time. The female cultivator immediately became still, as if she was frozen in midair. Junior Feng! Zhong Mingtian ordered again. Feng Qing's flying sword once again shot out an ice thorn, and this time it directly pierced into the female cultivator's heart. Rise! Zhong Mingtian's face became serious. He formed a sword sign, and that dark green fireball actually came out of the female cultivator's head. At this time, the fireball was a kind of blood red, and its shape was constantly changing. The female cultivator's soul inside seemed to be tearing and trying to escape. Go! Zhong Mingtian pointed his finger, and his body also slowly flew. That fireball obediently rushed toward the green calabash that was constantly vibrating. Seeing that the fireball was about to be sucked into the green-skinned gourd, Zhong Mingtian's face showed a trace of relief. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. He heard a slight poof from the fireball, like a bubble bursting, and a blood-red shadow came out from the fireball. Senior Yu, help me! Zhong Mingtian's face was shocked, and a red flush rushed to his eyes, and he hurriedly shouted. Jie, Yu Ming was already prepared. Just as Zhong Mingtian shouted, he flapped his wings and flew close to the green calabash. The blue and white light between his wings suddenly extended, and it pierced toward the blood-red shadow that came out of the fireball. A heart-wrenching scream sounded. The blood-red shadow was confined to the edge of the fireball by the blue light, and it couldn't fly out. At this time, the green calabash's suction force was generated, and the fireball and the blood-red shadow were both sucked in. The blood-red shadow's scream became longer and longer, as if it was falling into a bottomless abyss. The green calabash suddenly became still again, and it no longer vibrated. The fluctuations also disappeared, but the suction force from the calabash increased greatly, and a large amount of light blue light rushed into it. Thank you, Senior Yu! Zhong Mingtian's panic had not disappeared, and he bowed to salute. Haha, it's no problem. You are only at the first grade of the illusory sword realm, and the blood sacrifice is a little difficult for these cultivators. Anyway, there is still this last one. Rest a little more! Yu Ming nodded slightly, turned around, and flew up again. Yes, I understand. Zhong Mingtian smiled bitterly, and looked at Feng Qing. The two returned to their original position and closed their eyes to rest. Zhong Mingtian didn't want to do this, but at this time, the sword cultivators were fighting fiercely with the Dao sect, and there weren't many disciples who could be transferred. Moreover, the flying swords that they practiced were of the cold attribute, and there were even fewer of them. It would be best if there was a second-grade illusory sword realm disciple here, but there was no other way. They could only rely on her and Feng Qing now. However, fortunately, there was Senior Yu Ming here, whose cultivation was unfathomable. Although he looked like he was only at the second grade of the illusory sword realm, she had been warned by Zhong Haoshuan that this person was a bird cultivator with a background, and his strength was far from what she could detect. Senior Zhong and the others should be here by now, right? Zhong Mingtian knew that the two of them were a little stretched. The blood sacrifice took too long, and Zhong Haoshuan and the others must have finished much faster. They should have finished by now. They should be on their way here. Another hour passed, and there were no signs of Zhong Haoshuan and the others. The green-skin gourd began to vibrate for the last time. Seeing the green-skin gourd's light ripple, Zhong Mingtian opened her eyes with a bitter smile. Her sword companions were still abundant, but the soul talisman didn't rely solely on her sword companions. There was also a secret technique of the clear sword sect. She had used this secret technique 6 times today, and even she herself felt a little tired in the depths of her soul. It was as if she had gone through several cycles of reincarnation, and her soul was almost unable to move. This is the last time, Zhong Mingtian thought to herself. She gritted her teeth, looked at Feng Qing, and said with a smile, Junior Feng, this is the last time. We will be able to complete the task immediately. Yes, it's all thanks to Senior Sister's strength. Feng Qing was also a little happy. She knew that this time, she had done a great service, and the Clear Sword sect would definitely reward her greatly. After Zhong Mingtian bowed to Yu Ming frowned and said, Little friend Joan, do you want to rest for a while more? I won't hide it from Senior Yu. Joan Mingtian didn't hide it. Resting for a while more is no different from resting for half a day, unless this junior can rest for 7 days. Hee hee. Yu Ming nodded, then looked at a small hole in the distance and said curiously, Zhong Haoshuan and the others should be here by now. Perhaps Senior Zhong is waiting for us to meet up. Feng Qing smiled. After all, this place isn't suitable for the 3 senior brothers' flying swords. And perhaps... Yu Ming had a subtle feeling in his heart. Then, Zhong Mingtian took out the soul talisman again. When the soul talisman fireball appeared, Zhong Mingtian's body shook slightly, and even a layer of bruise flashed across his face. Junior Feng! Zhong Mingtian shouted, and Feng Qing understood. She grabbed her hand, and Xiao Mao's body was lifted into the air. Just as Feng Qing was about to activate the flying sword under her feet, she suddenly heard Yu Ming shout. Who is it? Feng Qing was stunned and turned to look at Yu Ming. She saw that Yu Ming's eyes were looking at the hole, and there was a strange expression in his eyes. However, when Feng Qing looked at the hole again, it was still calm, and there was no movement at all. At this moment, Xiao Mao, who had been listless all this time, suddenly flashed with a violent brilliance, and the sword light that was binding him also broke inch by inch. Humph! Yu Ming snorted coldly, and with a sway of his body, he appeared in front of Xiao Mao. His wings flapped, and countless rays of light shot out and surrounded Xiao Mao. The force of the rays of light trapped Xiao Mao, and no matter how Xiao Mao struggled, it was useless. Junior Feng! Zhong Mingtian's roar had a trace of anger in it. Yes, Feng Qing didn't dare to be distracted, and with a shake of her feet, a slender flying sword that looked like an icicle appeared, and it directly pierced between Xiao Mao's angry eyes. However, just as the flying sword was about to pierce through, something strange happened. A strong force of imprisonment descended from the sky, and in an instant, the flying sword was frozen in place. Who are you? Feng Qing was puzzled, and she wanted to activate the sword again, but she heard Yu Ming angrily looking at her back from afar. Feng Qing was shocked, and her body involuntarily flew away, and at the same time, she looked around. This glance didn't matter, but she saw a young cultivator in the robes of the Imperial Thunder Sect, who appeared less than 10 feet behind her. His slender eyes were slanted upward, and an indescribable murderous aura was emitted from his eyes. Moreover, just as Feng Qing turned her head, that cultivator rubbed his hands together, and a thick lightning bolt appeared out of nowhere, and struck her forehead. Suddenly, a rumor uncontrollably grew in her mind. Terror. Terror Phoenix? Yes, the 3 characteristics of the Terror Phoenix. The first was its huge phoenix celestial body, the second was its slanted phoenix eyes, and the third was its proficiency in controlling lightning. This was something she had never seen before in the other Imperial Thunder Sect disciples. Now, although the Imperial Thunder Sect cultivator in front of her didn't show his phoenix celestial body, Feng Qing still shouted with lingering fear. Terror Phoenix? Yu Ming was also shocked, and immediately thought of Ling Yinwu, but Xiao Hua ignored him, as if he didn't know Xiao Mao, and didn't want to look at Xiao Mao. The thunder palm, which was several times thicker than an ordinary cultivator's, struck one toward Feng Qing, and the other toward Zhong Mingtian. Poor Zhong Mingtian, who was trying her best to support the soul talisman, saw the huge lightning bolt coming, and hurriedly wanted to activate the flying sword to meet the enemy, but the incomparable exhaustion in her soul rushed to her heart, and the smooth sword essence became sluggish, and the sky-blue sword light that flew out like a snow bamboo slowed down a little. With just this slight delay, the lightning bolt hit her, and this was the result of Zhong Mingtian's dodging, and the thunder palm only hit her back. But what was the difference between hitting the back and hitting the forehead? The sky-blue sword light around Zhong Mingtian flashed, and was immediately annihilated, and a bloody hole the size of a bowl appeared on her back. Ah! Zhong Mingtian screamed and fell from midair. She fell from midair, but the soul talisman's fireball went out of control again. It suddenly swelled up and even let out a strange sound like a ghost wailing and a wolf howling. That sound resounded in the entire space, and it was probably the souls of many people. Run! Seeing Zhong Mingtian die in just one move, Feng Qing was even more frightened, and the flying sword suddenly flew out, turning into thousands of ice spikes, and rushed toward Xiaohua's thunder palm. Unfortunately, although these ice spikes were powerful, Xiaohua's thunder palm was even more turbulent, and that lightning bolt poured down like a waterfall, and the thousands of ice spikes were like little grass in the water, floating. -8. Chapter 24-22. What was even more inconceivable to Feng Qing was that Xiaohua's figure swayed in the lightning, almost blinding her eyes. Feng Qing knew that Xiaohua was going to attack her, but her Naiwen palace suddenly felt an incomparable stabbing pain. That pain was like her own ice-thorn flying sword piercing her forehead. Immediately after, a stick as thick as a bowl landed on her forehead. She could only hear a "piu" sound in her ears, and everything in this world stopped. Seeing Xiaohua smoothly kill the two illusionary sword disciples of the Bright Sword sect, Yuming sucked in a breath of cold air. When Xiaohua's gaze fell on the green calabash and looked at him again, he suddenly flapped his wings, and a completely blue and white light suddenly flew out. However, the direction of the light was not Xiaohua, nor was it the imprisoned Xiao Mao. It was the soul talisman fireball that was getting bigger and bigger. Puff! The fireball suddenly exploded, turning into dozens of pieces that flew into the air, separating Xiaohua from himself. Then, his figure flew towards the direction of the cave entrance. Yuming. This bird cultivator who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Feng Buping, actually wanted to escape. Where do you think you're going? Xiaohua clapped his hands, and the tidal bead flashed a light blue brilliance and flew out. The blue innate true water gushed out from the tidal bead, firmly blocking the entrance of the cave. Moreover, what made Feng Buping even more surprised was that the soul talisman fireball that exploded into dozens of pieces actually automatically flew to his left and surrounded him. What's going on? Yuming turned pale with fright. However, his figure was still not slow. With a flap of his wings, he suddenly flew away from Xiaohua. Give me your life. Xiaohua used the wind escape technique, and the wishful staff was also raised. The soul talisman fireball was urged by his soul silk to block in front of Yuming. Yuming's wings shone brightly, and with a schwa sound, they all shot towards Xiaohua. At the same time, he also blocked most of the soul talisman fireballs. However, in his haste, he did not pay attention to a small fireball on top of his head that was smaller than a little finger, and all of a sudden, it sank into the back of his head. However, the protective brilliance on his body didn't have any effect at all. Seeing the thousands of fine rays shooting towards him, the power of imprisonment, and the sharp force cutting through the air, Xiaohua did not dare to be negligent, and hurriedly waved the wishful steel staff to protect himself. Yuming had already flown to a part of the rock wall by the time all the fine lights were shot down. Xiaohua was a little anxious. He didn't know why Yuming flew over, but since he flew over, there must be a purpose. He tried his best to urge the wind escape, and in the blink of an eye, he caught up behind Yuming. At the same time, a palm of thunder struck out, and the wishful staff also hit his back. At this moment, Yuming let out an angry roar and turned around. His face was abnormally ferocious. A large bird that looked like a rain sparrow appeared from his body. The wings of the rain sparrow were over 100 feet wide. Blue and white light violently surged between the feathers. The water-type heaven and earth spirit energy that was already surging in the air was swept up like a hurricane. Woo-woo! Within the hurricane, fist-sized crystals had already formed. These crystals contained an enormous amount of power. Xiaohua knew that this Yuming could be together with Feng Buping, and his means were not ordinary. He was already prepared in his heart, but seeing the crystal grains within 100 feet, he was even more shocked. He could use the wind escape and other magical powers to deal with Feng Buping, but against Yuming, what good means did he have? Apart from the spiritual fire, he was afraid that there was only the flying sword. If the wishful staff could stretch 100 feet, it would naturally be effective, but it was a pity that the staff was now only 3 feet. Huh! It's a little strange. Xiaohua was thinking about how to break through the 100 feet of crystal grains to kill Yu Ming, but he saw that Yu Ming's magic did not seem to be targeted at him. The crystal grains sat cross-legged in the hurricane. Although it was powerful, it did not hit him. Instead, there was a faint tendency to hit Yu Ming himself. Looking at Yu Ming's expression again, it was extremely ferocious and also extremely painful. His body was tumbling in midair, and the light of his feathers was blindly scattered. That's the fire of the soul talisman! Xiaohua suddenly woke up. He was originally hiding at the entrance of the cave, wanting to kill Yu Ming first, and then capture Feng Qing and Zhong Mingtian. However, he did not expect that Zhong Mingtian would make a move on Xiao Mao, and when he activated his spiritual power while hiding, it attracted Yu Ming's attention. Therefore, Xiaohua killed Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing first. What Xiaohua did not expect was that Yu Ming would actually detonate the fire of the soul talisman and escape himself. Xiaohua had already read the content of the blood sacrifice on the way here. Although it was rough, he also knew that this was a soul cultivator's talisman. His soul should be useful. He took it and tested it, and it was true. The fire of the soul talisman was turned around to deal with Yu Ming. That little bit of fire of the soul talisman was not Xiaohua's doing. It was the result of a coincidence. Looking at Yu Ming's pain and struggling appearance, he should be fighting with the soul talisman. Feng Buping can dodge the soul stab, this Yu Ming must also have some tricks. This soul talisman only entered his brain a little bit, not necessarily. Just when Xiaohua was pondering, Yu Ming's face suddenly relaxed. Ha ha ha, terrifying phoenix! Ha ha, terrifying phoenix! How can you be this old man's opponent? While speaking, the brilliance on the wings increased again. Almost double the size of the crystal beads covered Xiaohua. Xiaohua frowned. His figure swayed. Using the hurricane between the crystal beads, he used the wind escape technique to rush towards Yu Ming from the gaps between the crystal beads. Rumble! A burst of earth-shattering noise was continuous. All the crystal beads exploded in an instant. This old bird doesn't want to live anymore. Xiaohua hurriedly retreated. The explosion of the crystal beads produced a strong tearing force around him at the same time. Not only did it break his protective brilliance, it also tore the Taoist robe he just changed into. He was in an even more sorry state than before when he was bare-armed. Fortunately, Xiaohua's wind escape technique was considered powerful. When he revealed his figure, he was already 100 zhang away. Although his face was pale gold and there were some bloodstains on the corner of his mouth, other than his body being almost naked, there weren't too many wounds. Ha ha ha, terrifying phoenix, how can you be this old man's opponent? Yu Ming shouted almost crazily. There were also faint bloodstains on the corner of his mouth. However, Yu Ming's following action made Xiaohua even more puzzled. This old bird actually used his divine ability on a huge spike not far away. He blasted off the tip of the spike. Moreover, his mouth was still shouting. Terrifying phoenix, how can you be this old man's opponent? This guy. Xiaohua saw Yu Ming's almost scattered eyes. He suddenly realized. This guy is crazy. No, he's not crazy. It's the soul talisman that made his soul. At the same time when Xiaohua realized, Yu Ming suddenly rushed straight towards the high-altitude rock wall. His mouth was still shouting. Terrifying phoenix, how can you be this old man's opponent? 1. A huge rumbling sound rang out, and Yu Ming quickly rushed into the rock wall. The rock wall emitted a faint ripple, and Yu Ming's figure disappeared. It can't be! Could it be that this old bird is playing tricks? Xiaohua was shocked. He hurriedly flew in front of the rock wall where Yu Ming disappeared. However, he saw that there was a huge crystal pillar on the rock wall. Where could Yu Ming's figure be seen? And beside the crystal pillar, the various colors of the 6-petaled crystals were still shining. Go! Xiaohua hurriedly used the earth escape technique and rushed towards that crystal pillar. Dang! A sound rang out. Xiaohua's head collided with it. It almost gave birth to a big bump. Damn it! Xiaohua woke up. This was definitely not a rock pillar. However, after Xiaohua took out both the fire escape technique and the wood escape technique to test, he was disappointed. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to catch up to Yu Ming no matter what. "I'm really unlucky," Xiaohua secretly said. "This young master is already 1,000 times more careful, but I still let a bird cultivator escape. This young master's name, Sai, I'm afraid that senior phone booping will know. Perhaps this is why there is no such thing as an impermeable wall in this world." Xiaohua sighed and landed. Seeing that there were no more abnormalities nearby, he flew over and grabbed with his hand. Crack! Bang! Bang! The restrictions that Yu Ming placed on Xiao Mao's body earlier were all broken by Xiaohua. And because Xiao Mao's figure landed, it was precisely between the spikes. He did not receive any damage from Yu Ming's crystal. "Big brother." Xiao Mao had already seen Xiaohua. Seeing Xiaohua use his divine ability, his eyes were filled with gratitude. However, he saw that Xiaohua did not look at him. He knew that he was afraid of attracting the attention of Yu Ming and the others. Thus, he did not dare to struggle. Only at this moment did he jump up. He bowed down and shouted, "Big brother saved this little brother's life again. Get up!" Xiaohua's voice was not angry but mighty. "A man's knees can bow to heaven and earth, can bow to his parents. Others do not need to bow, even if it is a brother. Yes, this little brother understands." Hearing Xiaohua call himself brother, Xiao Mao was overjoyed. He immediately jumped up from the ground and looked at Xiaohua with a smile. "Damn it, you've seen all of me!" Xiaohua chuckled as he formed hand seals. He immediately disappeared and reappeared in a moment. He had already changed into a new Taoist robe. Xiao Mao's eyes flashed with a strange color. He looked at Xiaohua with admiration. "Sai, you've finally grown up!" Xiaohua looked at the wind and frost on Xiao Mao's face and the slightly white hair on his temples. He sighed and said, "When this Xiao saw you, you were practically still a drooping child. On the other hand, big brother's appearance is still the same. This little brother is truly envious." Xiao Mao actually did not mind. His cultivation was difficult and dangerous. The hardships he suffered were not known to ordinary cultivators. He had long been accustomed to it. What's so good about it?" As Xiaohua spoke, he clapped his hand and took out a face-retaining pill and threw it to Xiao Mao. "You'll know what's bad about it after taking it." "Yes." Xiao Mao received the face-retaining pill without hesitation. He opened his mouth and swallowed it. "Sweat, you're not going to ask what kind of pill it is?" Xiaohua was also slightly stunned. -8. Chapter 24-23. Xiao Mao honestly replied, "Since Big Brother bestowed it to me, Little Brother would never dare to refuse. That's why I didn't ask." "Ha ha, good boy, good job." Xiaohua was very happy in his heart. During this period of time, he had saved Shui Hongshan countless times and was even contradicted by that guy. How could he compare to Xiao Mao's understanding? Brothers are brothers. When the ageless pill's medicinal power was produced, Xiao Mao felt faint lightning flickering in his meridians. He was somewhat puzzled. Xiaohua ignored him and looked at the azure-skinned gourd on top of the huge spike. That violent vibration had already come to an end. The brilliance was also somewhat dim. Xiaohua then looked at the majority of the remaining yellow talisman fireball in the air. His eyes turned and he had an idea. "Get up!" Xiaohua grabbed with his hand and Zhong Ningtian's body flew up from the ground. "Go!" Xiaohua pointed his hand and the soul strand drove the fireball into Zhong Ningtian's forehead. Zhong Ningtian was only at the brink of death after being struck by Xiaohua's lightning palm. When the yellow talisman fireball entered her body, it really rejected her soul that was about to disappear. Zhong Ningtian's expression immediately became sinister. Her already drowned consciousness also suddenly woke up. The pain she previously inflicted on the 6 Dao sect cultivators was also tasted one by one before she died. Rise, Zhong Ningtian was heavily injured. Even if the potential in her body was completely stimulated, How powerful could she be? Seeing her like a dying light, Xiaohua pointed his hand and the soul talisman fireball came out from the top of Zhong Mingtian's head. Zhong Mingtian's entire body was covered in bruises. With a plop, she fell to the ground and was piled up together with the female cultivator from Xunyan's school. At this moment, the two could no longer distinguish between friend and foe. Go! Xiaohua's face was similarly grave. His soul strand carefully pulled the soul-sucking fireball. Although Zhong Mingtian's soul struggled with all its might inside the fireball, it seemed to be unable to break free from Xiaohua's control. Wu! The azure-skinned gourd seemed to have some kind of intelligence. Without waiting for the soul talisman fireball to reach its head, it immediately emitted a green brilliance. The suction force at the mouth of the gourd greatly increased, and the fluctuations also rapidly shook. However, when the blood ball entered the green gourd, the entire gourd suddenly became still like before. It no longer vibrated, and the fluctuations disappeared. However, the suction force from the head of the gourd increased greatly, and a huge amount of light blue light rushed into it. Xiao Mao looked at all of this with his mouth agape. He didn't know how Xiaohua could understand all of this. Yes, it will be done in an hour! Xiaohua clapped his hands as he spoke. In his heart, he was also somewhat apprehensive. That supreme light azure sword had flown out for a long time. The sword transformation swordsman would probably rush over soon. However, calculating the time at Chicken Cry Mountain, this half an hour should be enough to wait. Big brother, what are you doing? Xiao Mao finally asked in a low voice. Heh, this is the yin-yang sword spirit of a sword cultivator. It seems like it's meant to be used against my Dao sect cultivators. I'm only an hour away from refining it. Xiaohua didn't try to hide anything. As he spoke, he pointed at the tidal bead guarding the entrance of the cave. A wave of sparkling innate primordial water was sucked into the bead and landed on his hand. I see. Xiao Mao's heart trembled as he looked at the many corpses under the spikes. How should we deal with these? Is that female cultivator a disciple of your Xunyan school? Xiaohua pointed and said, If you want to take her corpse away, put it in your storage pouch. As for the other cultivators you don't know, take them out of here and bury them outside. Yes. Xiao Mao nodded. He put away the cultivator's corpse, then looked at the two sword cultivators. What about these two? Bury them together. Xiaohua sighed. In the great battle of the Tao of the Sword, both swordsmen and cultivators are helpless. Yes, little brother understands. A trace of warmth flashed through Xiao Mao's eyes. Oh, take all the storage pouches. Xiaohua still didn't forget to say. 2 hours later, in a corner of Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain, in a rather large pit, the corpses of close to 20 swordsmen and cultivators were neatly placed there. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Fellow Taoists, and the swordsmen of Huan country, you were enemies when you were alive. Now that you've all become ghosts, don't fight anymore and become ghost cultivators. Fellow sword cultivators, don't blame this young master. The heavenly Tao is dissatisfied with the cycle of karma. Everything is decided by the heavens, rest in peace. Xiaohua didn't know if what he said was true or false. After saying a few words, he waved his hand, and a large amount of snow mixed with soil piled on top of everyone's corpses, slowly burying them. Xiao Mao watched from the side with curiosity. The sword cultivators that he had killed had all been burned or casually thrown away, but he had never been so serious about it. He waited until he flew up into the air with Xiaohua before he carefully asked, Big brother, since you are so kind, why don't you just leave the corpses of these sword cultivators underground and wait for the sword cultivators to come and find them and bring them back to their respective sects? Why do you have to go through so much trouble? Hee. Xiaohua laughed as he flew. Kindness is something that must be done, whether it's towards sword cultivators or cultivators. But Big brother definitely won't do something that brings trouble to himself. If we leave their corpses where they are, when the swordsmen come, they will definitely investigate their injuries. In this way, won't they know everything about Big brother's methods? The next time we meet the sword cultivators of Huan country, won't Big Brother be at a disadvantage? So that's how it is. Xiao Mao clapped his hands and laughed. Big Brother really isn't a stickler for formalities. I'll. As he spoke, Xiao Mao's gaze casually swept across the frozen lake below them. They were very close to the surface of the ice, and their appearances were reflected on the surface of the ice like a real mirror. He was very shocked by his own appearance. Then Xiao Mao stretched out his hand and waved it in front of his eyes. A circular mirror appeared in front of him. This? Looking at his dark sideburns and white and tender face in the mirror, Xiao Mao was stunned. After a moment, he looked at Xiao Hua and said in surprise, Big Brother, is this a rejuvenation pill? Who knows? Xiao Hua shrugged. I got it from someone else's storage bag. It looks similar to the rejuvenation pill that was auctioned in Sky Patrol City last time. Big Brother has no use for it, so I'm just giving it to you to try. This? Xiao Mao's eyes turned slightly, and he said somewhat embarrassedly, Is there more in the storage bag? Xiao Hua was even more stunned, but then he nodded and said, There's one more. If you want two, that won't do. That's great, just one will do. Xiao Mao said anxiously. Who is it for? Xiao Hua asked with a smile. Xiao Mao's white and tender face was now slightly red, and he said in a low voice, It's for the sect. Hearing Xiao Mao's voice that was as soft as a mosquito's, Xiao Hua laughed. He clapped his hands and took out another face-retaining pill, and said, Forget it, we'll talk about it when we meet. Okay. Xiao Mao was relieved and explained, She's not in Sky Patrol City now. When there's a chance, I'll definitely let her come and meet Big Brother. But just as Xiao Mao reached out to take the jade bottle, Xiao Hua withdrew his hand and asked thoughtfully, Could it be that you don't even want Big Brother to know her name? Hee. Xiao Mao smacked his lips and said embarrassedly, Her name is Qin Jian. What Qin Jian? Xiao Hua was stunned. There were many people with the same name in this world. She might have the same name as the illusory swordsman of Huan Country, Qin Jian. This disciple of Xuyunyuan's school was a little unlucky. It's not the sword from Flying Sword. Xiao Mao naturally knew Xiao Hua's surprise and hurriedly explained. It's the Jian from Healthy. I didn't want to say it just now because of this. Ha! Xiao Hua stuffed the jade bottle into his hand and laughed. Who cares if her name is the same or not? Even if it's the same, so what? When Big Brother kills Qin Jian, won't Xiaoyu continent only have Qin Jian from Xuyunyuan school left? Hee, Big Brother wants to kill Qin Jian? Xiao Mao's face showed envy. Why? You're interested too? Xiao Hua looked at Xiao Mao and asked. Yes. Xiao Mao replied, but he was a little regretful. Unfortunately, my cultivation is too low and can't help Big Brother much. You're already in the middle stage of foundation establishment. You're even stronger than Big Brother. Why can't you help? Xiao Hua smiled. Hee. Xiao Mao naturally knew that Xiao Hua hid his cultivation, but he didn't point it out. He smiled apologetically. Even if I'm in the middle stage of foundation establishment, killing Qin Jian is still difficult. Also, I just broke through to the middle stage of foundation establishment. It's nothing. Oh? You just broke through? Why didn't you return to Xuyunyuan school? Xiao Hua asked curiously. Xiao Mao shook his head and said, Master said that the battlefield is the best opportunity to raise one's cultivation. He won't let me return to Xuyunyuan school until the battle ends. Motherfucker, there's still this kind of master. Immediately, Xiao Hua felt that his extremely harsh master was helpless and close to him. Xiao Mao smiled. This is also because master is good to me. I entered the middle stage of foundation establishment on the battlefield. If I was in Xuyunyuan school, I might not be able to succeed even after a few more years. Furthermore, my cultivation has improved a lot during this period of time. And Xiao Hua nodded and asked again, Have you been practicing that secret technique? Yes. Xiao Mao always wanted to say, but he knew that it was Xiao Hua's secret. If Xiao Hua didn't mention it, he also didn't dare to rashly mention it. Thanks to Big Brother's secret technique, not only did I benefit a lot in my cultivation, I also used that secret technique to escape with my life many times. Do you have any questions? Xiaohua asked again. Yes. Xiao Mao answered without hesitation, his face filled with joy. Good, say it. Xiaohua nodded. Big Brother will give you a few pointers. Great. I've been looking forward to this day for a long time. Xiao Mao almost jumped up. Then Xiao Mao spoke of the many questions that were engraved in his mind one by one. Xiaohua patiently explained them one by one, and also talked about the slightly more profound dragon transformation art. Xiao Mao was so excited that he scratched his ears and cheeks. Seeing that Xiao Mao was so eager to learn, Xiaohua simply didn't sleep or rest, flying and talking at the same time. The next evening, Xiaohua was answering Xiao Mao's questions with a smile when suddenly a kind of palpitation surged in his heart. Xiaohua quivered and immediately felt that something was wrong. He grabbed Xiao Mao's hand and said anxiously, "Quickly fly back." "No. Fly to the left." Just as the two of them flew a few hundred feet, a powerful divine sense swept over from the direction of Sky Patrol City. -8. Chapter 24. Seeing Xiaohua suddenly change the direction of his flight, first returning to the Yin-Yang Dual Perfection Mountain and then changing directions, Xiao Mao was originally in a daze. He still hadn't broken free from his comprehension of the dragonization art, and could only instinctively follow Xiaohua. However, when he saw Xiaohua in such a state of panic and wanted to ask him about it, an angry divine sense swept over like an avalanche. Transform! Transform into a swordsman! Although Xiao Mao hadn't become a swordsman, the flying sword-like divine sense of a swordsman was clearly different from a cultivator. How could Xiao Mao not know that a swordsman had come when his divine sense swept over? That divine sense swept past Xiaohua and Xiao Mao and immediately locked onto them. Immediately after, a rainbow-like sword light slowly rose from the distant horizon, and a sword hum that sounded like a gurgling stream seemed to resound in the horizon, but also seemed to be ringing in their ears. Xiaohua and Xiao Mao's expressions changed greatly. Even if they used their heels to think, they knew that the arrival of a swordsman was related to the Yin-Yang Dual Perfection Mountain. Run! Xiao Mao was indeed panicking at this time. After an idea emerged in his mind, he hurriedly said, "Big Brother, your cultivation is high. Run first, don't wait for me." However, seeing that Xiaohua was also panicking and was even flying slower than him, Xiao Mao was puzzled again. Naturally, this kind of puzzlement disappeared when he saw Xiaohua wink at him. He knew that Xiaohua was concealing his cultivation and was also unwilling to abandon him. The gurgling stream grew louder and louder, almost turning into a torrential river and a surging tide. It enveloped the space of several hundred feet around the two of them. Almost all the spiritual energy of heaven and earth seemed to have solidified. "Don't fly!" Xiaohua shouted loudly and then stood respectfully in the air. Hearing this, Xiao Mao also hurriedly stopped and stood there respectfully as if he was greeting a nascent soul master. 1. A sound like waves beating against the shore sounded. That dark green sword light flowed across the horizon and landed in front of the two of them. "Greetings to Senior transforming into a swordsman." Xiaohua and Xiao Mao bowed respectfully. Humph, that dark green sword light didn't dissipate at all. A metallic sound flashed from the blue waves and scattered the true essence in the two of them. "Senior, please spare my life!" Xiao Mao hurriedly cried out as he fell. Sure enough, right after falling for around 30 meters, Xiao Mao suddenly felt that his true essence could be condensed again, and he hurriedly circulated his magic power and barely managed to stabilize his body. Xiaohua, who was beside Xiao Mao, seemed to be in an even more miserable state. He directly fell for over 30 meters before barely standing up, and his little face had long since become ghastly pale. The sword hummed again, and the dark green sword light didn't stop there. It swept up the surrounding spiritual energy, and with a gale, it rushed into the distance. That place was where the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain was located. Xiao Mao didn't dare to move. After waiting for the time it took to smoke a cigarette, he finally heard Xiao Hua's smiling voice. "Let's go!" "Yes, big brother!" Xiao Mao was drenched in sweat. He rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, this swordsman still had some of the demeanor of a senior, and did not make things difficult for him. If he really used soul-searching or other methods, he was afraid that it would be difficult for him to escape with his life. When he looked at Xiao Hua again, he also had a look of relief on his face. Xiao Hua was very clear about what he had done. To be able to escape this calamity so easily, Xiao Hua unconsciously touched his auspicious jade talisman. After transforming into a sword and leaving, Xiao Hua and Xiao Mao pretended to fly for an hour. Immediately after, they turned towards the Gale snowfield. Xiao Mao tidied up his mood and asked for guidance again. On this day, after Xiao Mao finished listening to Xiao Hua's teachings, he carefully pondered, but his gaze fell on the mountain range below his feet. "Oh, big brother, isn't that my Xunyan school's spiritual stone vein in front?" Xiao Mao said anxiously. "Could it be that my Xunyan school's spiritual stone vein hasn't been occupied by sword cultivators?" In these few days, Xiao Hua only explained the dragon transformation art, but didn't tell Xiao Mao why he was looking for him. "Your Xunyan school's spiritual stone vein has long been occupied by sword cultivators. Otherwise, how would Big Brother know your whereabouts?" Xiao Hua replied carelessly. "Big Brother, did you specially look for me?" Xiao Mao looked at Xiao Hua in disbelief. Little brother thought that Big Brother was just lucky. Everything was just a coincidence. Don't mention it." Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, "Big Brother came to the Gale snowfield with someone else. We even agreed to meet in the vicinity." "Yes." Xiao Mao was even more grateful and didn't ask any more questions. Xiao Hua looked around. It wasn't too far from Xunyan School's spiritual stone vein, and it wasn't too far from the place where he parted ways with Li Zongbao. He took out his command medallion. Then, he immersed his divine sense in it. After looking at it for a moment, he pointed at the command medallion. A faint light flew out from the command medallion and rushed into the blue sky, flying in a certain direction. "Let's go." Xiao Hua waved his hand and chased after that light. After flying for 2 hours, 2 cultivators flew over from the distant sky. One was Li Zongbao, and the other was a golden core cultivator dressed in Xunyan School's Taoist robes. "This is my Xunyan School's Gao Qingyuan, Martial Uncle Gao." Xiao Mao naturally recognized that golden core cultivator and said in a low voice, Xiao Hua nodded and led Xiao Mao over. He bowed and said, "Junior Xiao Hua of the Imperial Thunder Sect greets Martial Uncle Gao." Xiao Mao also bowed and greeted at the same time. Ha, so you're Xiao Hua. Gao Qingyuan, whose hair was white but whose smile was amiable, waved his hand and blocked Xiao Hua's greeting. However, he ignored Xiao Mao and said to Xiao Hua, "I've been waiting here for you for several days. I finally get to see you." Xiao Hua was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Senior, why are you looking for me?" "I don't know. I've made you wait for a long time." Ha, it's nothing." Gao Qingyuan waved his hand and said, "You saved several hundred disciples of my Xunyan school. With such a great favor, it's only right for me to wait several years." "I don't dare." Xiao Hua suddenly understood and smiled apologetically. "I just used a little trick. I didn't expect that a brainless sword cultivator would actually fall for it." Hearing Xiao Hua vaguely say, "a little trick," Gao Qingyuan knew that Xiao Hua didn't want to say more. He also smiled and said, "I don't care what method you used. As long as you can save my Xunyan school disciples, I'll be grateful." "I don't dare. I don't deserve senior's gratitude." Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand. A golden core cultivator naturally wouldn't greet a Foundation establishment cultivator. Seeing Xiao Hua decline, Gao Qingyuan took the opportunity and said, "I've already sent a message to Sky Patrol City regarding little friend Zhao's contribution. Moreover, I've left a mark on Li Zongbao's captain token. When Li Zongbao hands over the captain token to Sky Patrol City's Assembly Hall, little friend Zhao's contribution will naturally be rewarded. Xiaohua was overjoyed and bowed. Many thanks, Senior Gao. In addition, tonight several golden core cultivators of my Xunyan school, as well as several fellow Taoists from friendly sects, will act together to take back my Xunyan school's spirit stone mine. I wonder if little friend Xiao is interested? That's another great merit, Gao Chengyuan said with a grin. This? Xiaohua was very hesitant. He knew very well that he had taken away a lot of the supreme-grade spirit stones stored in the Xunyan School's spirit stone mine. Even if the Xunyan School's disciples took back the spirit stone mine, he was afraid that they would suffer heavy losses. It couldn't be considered a great merit. Xiaohua looked at Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao's face was still expressionless. Xiaohua's heart moved, and he smiled apologetically. Is Qin Jian in this spirit stone mine? Qin Jian? Gao Qingyuan was stunned, and a trace of a smile appeared on his face. He turned to look at Li Zongbao and said, Little friend Li, Xiaohua is indeed as you said. This old man can be considered to have lost to you. He. Li Zongbao smiled and didn't answer. When Xiaohua heard, his heart was also clear. He knew that Li Zongbao didn't agree to Gao Qingyuan's matter. As far as this old man knows, Qin Jian isn't in this Gale snowfield. As for where he is, this old man also doesn't know, Gao Qingyuan said. Actually, this old man is also looking for this bastard. However, this bastard is too cunning. It's really hard to find him. If you all can kill that bastard Qin Jian, this old man will also be happy. It's a pity that my Xunyan school's disciples. Martial Uncle Gao. Xiao Mao took the opportunity to bow. This disciple is willing to follow Senior Brother Li and Xiao. Senior Brother Xiao to kill Qin Jian and also spread the fame of my Xunyan school's disciples. Whose disciple are you? At this moment, Gao Qingyuan asked Xiao Mao. This disciple is Xiao Mao, a disciple of Qingling Mountain's Yuan Jiming. Xiao Mao respectfully replied. Oh, so it's Senior Brother Yuan's disciple. You and Xiaohua. Gao Qingyuan was somewhat pensive. Xiao Mao was still respectful. Good, Martial Uncle knows. This junior has only met Xiaohua and Senior Brother Xiao when we were young. We don't have any blood relations. Oh, so it's like that. Gao Qingyuan nodded. He then looked at Li Zongbao and smiled. However, your cultivation is only at the middle stage of foundation establishment. I'm afraid that you'll be a burden to him? Xiaohua didn't expect Xiao Mao to want to follow him. However, since Xiao Mao had spoken, Xiaohua naturally wouldn't reject his intentions. He said, Junior hasn't reached the middle stage of foundation establishment yet? Since Junior Brother Xiao wants to kill Qin Jian, then lend us a hand. And that's fine too. Li Zongbao took out the team leader token and said, If Martial Uncle Gao agrees, then Junior will bring Xiao Mao along. Ha, well said. Why would Gao Qingyuan care about a disciple who had just reached the middle stage of foundation establishment? He casually took out his own token and left a mark on Li Zongbao's token. Li Zongbao also left a mark on Xiao Mao's token. This way, Xiao Mao officially joined Li Zongbao's special team in the discussion hall. After Xiaohua and the others respectfully bid farewell to Gao Qingyuan, the three of them flew into the sky. Only then did Xiaohua introduce Xiao Mao to Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao nodded slightly. He didn't think that Xiao Mao had the qualifications to join his team. However, since Xiaohua had spoken, how could Li Zongbao, a cultivator who had been good at socializing since young, not agree? Moreover, Li Zongbao was extremely curious. How did Xiaohua save Xiao Mao? Where did he find Xiao Mao? However, Xiao Mao was different. He had also heard of Li Zongbao's reputation since young. Now that he saw Li Zongbao standing in front of him and was about to fight alongside him, the excitement in his heart was self-evident. -8. Chapter 24-25. Senior Brotherly, my respect for you has been there since I was a child. Xiao Mao stammered as he bowed to Li Zongbao. Before he started practicing the parting love treasure mirror, Li Zongbao would have nodded with a smile. He would have responded warmly and said a few words of encouragement, showing the demeanor of a teacher. But now, Li Zongbao nodded slightly but didn't say much. He only said, "Well, you're not bad either. Xiaohua has talked about you before." Tisk, Xiaohua laughed. "Big brother has saved you several times, but I don't see you being so respectful. Haha, big brother is big brother, senior brotherly is senior brotherly. I grew up listening to senior brotherly's name." Xiao Mao knew that Xiaohua didn't care about it. He smiled and replied, "And when I was practicing, I set a goal for myself and wanted to use senior brotherly as my standard." Xiao Mao's eyes showed a trace of gloominess, but Xiaohua and Li Zongbao didn't see it. Seeing that Li Zongbao didn't want to talk to him, Xiaohua smiled. "Among the young cultivators in the Three Kingdoms, senior brother Li's reputation is the highest. Who doesn't see him as their idol? Everyone talks about him like that when they see him. I'm afraid he's tired of hearing it." "Haha, that's for sure." Xiao Mao nodded. "I've heard from some cultivators in the Utopia faction that Senior Brotherly is the #1 cultivator under the Golden Core stage in the Three Kingdoms. You can imagine how much praise he has. That was in the past. I'm afraid I'll have to give way in the future," Li Zongbao suddenly said. "Oh? Why?" Xiao Mao was stunned. Could it be? Immediately, Xiao Mao came to a realization. He shook his head disapprovingly and said, "Fairy Hong Xia and Yun Jichong of the Huanhua sect. Although their reputations are resounding, from what I know, they don't live up to their reputations. Yun Jichong is only in the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment stage and has yet to enter the late stage of the Foundation Establishment stage. Fairy Hong Xia has just entered the late stage of the Foundation Establishment stage." "Oh? Fairy Hong Xia is in the late stage of the Foundation Establishment stage?" Xiaohua heard that Xiao Mao compared Fairy Hong Xia and Yun Jichong to Li Zongbao, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When he heard the news about Fairy Hong Xia, he was even more overjoyed. "What? Big brother knows Fairy Hong Xia?" Xiao Mao was slightly taken aback. Then, he slapped his own head. "Io, that rumored disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Could it be Big Brother?" "What? Big Brother, this pretty boy is not worthy of Fairy Hong Xia?" Xiaohua touched his chin and asked in dissatisfaction. "Ha ha ha, of course, of course. If it wasn't for Big Brother, which cultivator in this world would be worthy of?" At this point, Xiao Mao realized that there was a flaw in his words and looked at Li Zongbao rather awkwardly. When he looked at Li Zongbao again, the corners of his mouth were slightly twitching. Clearly, Xiao Mao's words had triggered his thoughts. Seeing this, Xiao Mao felt a little uneasy. He didn't know what he had said wrong. He looked at Xiaohua for help. Xiaohua sighed in his heart. Now that Kai Zhuoxia had died, Li Zongbao. What should Xiaohua say? "Oh? That's right, how come Yun Guichong is about to reach the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm?" Xiaohua could only change the topic. Xiao Mao hurriedly said, "Yes, otherwise how could Yun Guichong's reputation catch up to senior brother Li's? Ever since he reached the Foundation Establishment realm, his cultivation has advanced by leaps and bounds. In just a few decades, he rushed into the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. The news I heard was more than 10 years ago. Now, who knows if he has already reached the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm? No matter how powerful he is definitely not my opponent. Not to mention Xiaohua's opponent." Li Zongbao's face regained its calm as he said in a low voice, "Yes." When Xiao Mao heard this, he suddenly realized that Li Zongbao's earlier words also meant this. However, he didn't compare Xiaohua to Li Zongbao. Because, in his eyes, Xiaohua killed 3 illusory swordsmen with a raise of his hand. And there were also 3 illusory swordsmen that he didn't see. Xiaohua's cultivation had long surpassed the Gold Core realm. How could Li Zongbao compare to Xiaohua? In his words, he had included Xiaohua as well. Indeed. Xiao Mao hurriedly rubbed his hands and said with a smile, Big Brother's cultivation is really powerful. It is comparable to Senior Brother Li's. At this point, Xiao Mao suddenly remembered that when he met Xiao Hua that year, Xiao Hua was indeed much older than him, but his cultivation was much lower than his. When they met for the second time, Xiao Hua's cultivation was still inferior to his. But now, don't flatter him. Even if he rode a dragon, he wouldn't be able to catch up. He only treated Xiao Hua as his family and only felt that his cultivation should be higher than his. However, he never thought that Xiao Hua's progress would be so shocking. I'm afraid that secret technique is the secret to Big Brother's cultivation, right? Xiao Mao thought again, his heart full of gratitude. Seeing that Li Zongbao pointed out his cultivation, Xiao Hua simply became a taciturn gourd. He didn't mention this matter and asked in return, Senior Brother Li, let's not talk about this anymore. Where are we going now? If Qin Jian isn't in the Gale's snowfield, where is he? This time, we failed to ambush Qin Jian and fell into the sword cultivator's trap. Li Zongbao said, Our Taoist sect cultivators suffered heavy losses. However, those cultivators seemed to be somewhat unwilling. They listened to Gao Qingyuan's instigation and prepared to work for Xuyunyuan's school. Tonight, they will attack Xuyunyuan's school's spiritual stone mine. As for those Xuyunyuan school disciples, they were sent back to Sky Patrol City by Gao Qingyuan. Why did Uncle Master Gao Qingyuan suddenly come to the Gale's snowfield? Xiao Mao felt a little strange and said regretfully, If only they had come a few days earlier. Humph. They were just passing by. If they hadn't met your Xuyunyuan school disciples who were rescued by Xiao Hua, they wouldn't have thought of the spiritual stone mine. Li Zongbao sneered. He didn't seem to like Gao Qingyuan and the others. Then Li Zongbao said to Xiao Hua, Since Qin Jian isn't in the Gale's snowfield and Gao Qingyuan and the others don't know, we naturally have to return to Sky Patrol City and wait for news of Qin Jian before we come out. Oh. Xiao Hua nodded. That's good too. I'm afraid the disciples of the first team of the Thunder Controlling Sect will also be going back. I can go back and send them off. Not necessarily. Li Zongbao said again. If we receive any news on the way, we won't return to Sky Patrol City. Okay. Xiao Hua nodded and did not object. Xiao Mao was not stressed at all. He understood that no matter how powerful Qin Jian was, he was just an illusory swordsman. Zhong Haoshuan and the others who captured him were also illusory swordsmen, and were not inferior to Qin Jian. Xiao Hua could kill Zhong Haoshuan alone, so he could naturally kill Qin Jian. He could only take credit for himself and also receive guidance from Xiao Hua. What was wrong with that? The three of them flew for a long time. When Xiao Hua saw that Li Zongbao was no longer talking about Xiao Mao, he turned his head and said, Senior Brother Li, do you remember the disciples of the Thunder Controlling Sect that we met before we entered the Gale's snowfield? Yes, of course. Li Zongbao replied faintly. Could it be that you have some new clues? That's right. Xiao Hua nodded and said, This time when I went to rescue Xiao Mao, I happened to meet the deceased teacher of the Thunder Controlling Sect. Then Xiao Hua was about to tell him what happened, but Li Zongbao waved his hand and said, You can give me a brief account of what happened. I'm also curious. Why did the sword cultivator capture Xiao Mao? However, if it involves the secrets of the Thunder Controlling Sect or the Xuyunyuan school, it's fine if I don't tell you. Seeing that Li Zongbao's character was so noble, Xiao Hua was full of admiration. To tell the truth, if he were in Li Zongbao's shoes, he would rather Li Zongbao tell him everything in detail, including where the spirit stones were and where the treasures were. Everyone is different. Xiao Hua sighed and roughly told the whole story. Of course, he would never tell Li Zongbao about the spiritual stones, innate pure water and innate jellyfish. The teacher of the Thunder Controlling Sect discovered the secret of the sword cultivator. It should be related to the war, so he was killed by the sword cultivator. Xiao Hua finally said, Whether it's Senior Brother Li or me, this news can be reported to the conference hall. Moreover, the sword cultivator went from the direction of the Sky Patrol City to the Yin Yang Twin Spring Mountain. If the news is not true, why would the sword cultivator care? No need. Li Zongbao waved his hand and said, Let's go to the conference hall now. It's better for you to report to the conference hall. After all, your teacher of the thunder-controlling sect exchanged his life for this. It's just that. Xiaohua was still hesitant. He was afraid that the golden core cultivators in the conference hall would get to the bottom of the matter and his benefits would be discovered. Li Zongbao obviously understood Xiaohua's thoughts and said coldly, Don't pay attention to them. Don't say anything if you don't want to. Your things are your things. If others want them, they have to get your permission. If you feel that it's inappropriate, you can push all the blame to me. Yes, I know. Xiaohua was delighted. Actually, what secrets, what schemes, in the face of absolute strength, they are all in vain, Li Zongbao said proudly. I don't believe that a sword cultivator can control the outcome of a battle between Dao cultivators with a flying sword. Xiaohua heard and felt that it was reasonable. Even he himself might not be afraid of the supreme light sword, let alone a nascent soul cultivator. But what about those sword formations? Xiaohua reminded. Sword cultivators have sword formations. My Dao sect naturally also has formations, Li Zongbao said indifferently. Although the Dao of formations has declined, it's more than enough to deal with sword formations. Don't worry, this matter is not up to you and me. We only need to remind them of this matter. Okay, I understand. Xiaohua nodded. Then the three of them hurried on with their journey. Another 10 days passed. During this time, Xiao Mao was really studious. While Xiaohua was steering the flying boat, he sat cross-legged beside Xiaohua. If he had any questions, he would immediately send a voice transmission to Xiaohua. Xiaohua would also immediately answer him. His tireless appearance was not inferior to that of a strict teacher. On this day, they were passing through a vast expanse of white snow. In order to avoid suspicion, Li Zongbao stood in front of the flowing cloud-flying boat with his hands folded. He heard the rumbling of magic treasures in front of him. Li Zongbao scanned with his divine sense and shouted, Don't hurt my Dao sect disciple! While speaking, Li Zongbao waved his hand and took out the Immortal piercing whip from his storage bag. His figure flashed and flew out of the flowing cloud-flying boat, charging into the battle ahead. -8. Chapter 24-26. Senior brotherly, my respect for you has been there since I was a child. Xiao Mao stammered as he bowed to Li Zongbao. Before he started practicing the parting love treasure mirror, Li Zongbao would have nodded with a smile. He would have responded warmly and said a few words of encouragement, showing the demeanor of a teacher. But now, Li Zongbao nodded slightly but didn't say much. He only said, Well, you're not bad either. Xiaohua has talked about you before. Tisk, Xiaohua laughed. Big brother has saved you several times, but I don't see you being so respectful. Haha, big brother is big brother, senior brotherly is senior brotherly. I grew up listening to senior brotherly's name. Xiao Mao knew that Xiaohua didn't care about it. He smiled and replied, And when I was practicing, I set a goal for myself and wanted to use senior brotherly as my standard. Xiao Mao's eyes showed a trace of gloominess, but Xiaohua and Li Zongbao didn't see it. Seeing that Li Zongbao didn't want to talk to him, Xiaohua smiled. Among the young cultivators in the Three Kingdoms, senior brother Li's reputation is the highest. Who doesn't see him as their idol? Everyone talks about him like that when they see him. I'm afraid he's tired of hearing it. Haha, that's for sure. Xiao Mao nodded. I've heard from some cultivators in the Utopia faction that senior brother Li is the #1 cultivator under the Golden Core stage in the Three Kingdoms. You can imagine how much praise he has. That was in the past. I'm afraid I'll have to give way in the future, Li Zongbao suddenly said. Oh? Why? Xiao Mao was stunned. Could it be? Immediately, Xiao Mao came to a realization. He shook his head disapprovingly and said, Fairy Hong Xia and Yun Jichong of the Huanhua sect. Although their reputations are resounding, from what I know, they don't live up to their reputations. Yun Jichong is only in the middle stage of the foundation establishment stage and has yet to enter the late stage of the foundation establishment stage. Fairy Hong Xia has just entered the late stage of the foundation establishment stage. Oh? Fairy Hong Xia is in the late stage of the foundation establishment stage? Xiao Hua heard that Xiao Mao compared Fairy Hong Xia and Yun Jichong to Li Zongbao, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When he heard the news about Fairy Hong Xia, he was even more overjoyed. What? Big brother knows Fairy Hong Xia? Xiao Mao was slightly taken aback. Then, he slapped his own head. Io, that rumored disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Could it be Big Brother? What? Big Brother, this pretty boy is not worthy of Fairy Hong Xia? Xiao Hua touched his chin and asked in dissatisfaction. Ha ha ha, of course. If it wasn't for Big Brother, which cultivator in this world would be worthy of? At this point, Xiao Mao realized that there was a flaw in his words and looked at Li Zongbao rather awkwardly. When he looked at Li Zongbao again, the corners of his mouth were slightly twitching. Clearly, Xiao Mao's words had triggered his thoughts. Seeing this, Xiao Mao felt a little uneasy. He didn't know what he had said wrong. He looked at Xiao Hua for help. Xiao Hua sighed in his heart. Now that Kai Zhuoxia had died, Li Zongbao. What should Xiao Hua say? Oh? That's right, how come Yun Guichong is about to reach the late stage of foundation establishment? Xiao Hua had no choice but to change the topic. Xiao Mao hurriedly said, That's right. Otherwise, how could Yun Guichong's reputation catch up to senior brother Li's? Ever since he reached foundation establishment, his cultivation has advanced by leaps and bounds. In just a few decades, he reached the middle stage of foundation establishment. The news I heard was more than 10 years ago. Now, who knows if he has already reached the late stage of foundation establishment? No matter how powerful he is definitely not my opponent. Not to mention Xiao Hua's opponent. Li Zongbao's face regained its calmness and said in a low voice, Yes. When Xiao Mao heard this, he suddenly realized that Li Zongbao's earlier words also meant this. But he didn't compare Xiao Hua to Li Zongbao. Because, in his eyes, Xiao Hua killed 3 illusory swordsmen with a raise of his hand. And there were also 3 illusory swordsmen that he hadn't seen. Xiao Hua's cultivation had long surpassed gold core. How could Li Zongbao compare to Xiao Hua? In his words, he had included Xiao Hua as well. Indeed. Xiao Mao hurriedly rubbed his hands and said with a smile, Big Brother's cultivation is really powerful. It is comparable to senior brother Li's. At this point, Xiao Mao suddenly remembered that when he met Xiao Hua was much older than him, but his cultivation was much lower than his. When they met for the second time, Xiao Hua's cultivation was still inferior to his. But now, don't flatter him. Even if he rode a dragon, he wouldn't be able to catch up. He only treated Xiao Hua as his family. He only thought that Xiao Hua's cultivation should be higher than his, but he never thought that Xiao Hua's progress would be so shocking. I'm afraid that secret technique is the secret to Big Brother's cultivation, right? Xiao Mao thought again, his heart full of gratitude. Seeing that Li Zongbao pointed out his cultivation, Xiao Hua simply became a taciturn gourd. He didn't mention this matter and asked in return, Senior Brother Li, let's not talk about this anymore. Where are we going now? If Qin Jian isn't in the Gale snowfield, where is he? This time, we failed to ambush Qin Jian. Instead, we fell into the sword cultivator's trap. Li Zongbao said. Our Taoist sect cultivators suffered heavy losses. However, those cultivators seemed to be a little unwilling. They listened to Gao Chengyuan's instigation and prepared to work for Xuyuanyan's school. Tonight, they will attack Xuyuanyan's school's spiritual stone mine. As for those Xuyuanyan school disciples, they were sent back to Sky Patrol City by Gao Chengyuan. Why did Uncle Gao Chengyuan suddenly come to the Gale snowfield? Xiao Mao was a little puzzled and said regretfully, If only they had come a few days earlier. Humph. They were just passing by. If they hadn't met your Xunyan school disciples who were rescued by Xiao Hua, they wouldn't have thought of the spiritual stone mine. Li Zongbao sneered. He didn't like Gao Qingyuan and the others. Then Li Zongbao said to Xiao Hua, since Qin Jian isn't in the Gale snowfield, and Gao Qingyuan and the others don't know, we naturally have to return to Sky Patrol City and wait for news of Qin Jian before we come out. Oh. Xiao Hua nodded. That's good too. I'm afraid the disciples of the first team of the Thunder Controlling Sect will also be going back. I can go back and send them off. Not necessarily. Li Zongbao said again. If we receive any news on the way, we won't return to Sky Patrol City. Okay. Xiao Hua nodded and didn't object. Xiao Mao didn't feel any pressure at all. He understood that no matter how powerful Qin Jian was, he was merely an illusory swordsman. Zhong Haoshuan and the others who captured him were also illusory swordsmen and weren't inferior to Qin Jian. If Xiao Hua could kill Zhong Haoshuan by himself, he would naturally be able to kill Qin Jian as well. If Xiao Mao followed Xiao Hua, he would only be able to obtain merits. In addition, he would also be able to receive guidance from Xiao Hua. The three of them flew for a long time. When Xiao Hua saw that Li Zongbao didn't mention anything about Xiao Mao, he turned his head and said, Senior Brother Li, do you remember the disciples of the Thunder Controlling Sect that we met before we entered the Gale's snowfield? Yes, of course. Li Zongbao replied indifferently. Could it be that you have some new clues? That's right. Xiao Hua nodded and said, this time when I went to rescue Xiao Mao, I happened to meet the deceased teacher of the Thunder Controlling Sect. Then Xiao Hua was about to tell him what happened, but Li Zongbao waved his hand and said, you can give me a brief account of what happened. I'm also curious. Why did the sword cultivator capture Xiao Mao? However, if it's related to the secrets of the Thunder Controlling Sect or the Xunyan School, I won't say it. Seeing that Li Zongbao's character was so noble, Xiao Hua was full of admiration. To tell the truth, if he were in Li Zongbao's shoes, he would rather Li Zongbao tell him everything in detail, including where the spirit stones were and where the treasures were. Everyone is different. Xiao Hua sighed and roughly told the whole story. Of course, he wouldn't tell Li Zongbao about the spiritual stones, innate pure water and innate jellyfish. The teacher of the Thunder Controlling Sect discovered the secret of the sword cultivator. It should be related to the war, so he was killed by the sword cultivator. Xiao Hua finally said, whether it's Senior Brother Li or me, this news can be reported to the conference hall. Moreover, the sword cultivator went from the direction of the Sky Patrol City to the Yin-Yang Twin Spring Mountain. If the news wasn't true, why would the sword cultivator care? No need. Li Zongbao waved his hand and said, let's go to the conference hall now. It's better for you to report to the conference hall. After all, your teacher of the Thunder Controlling Sect exchanged his life for this. It's just that. Xiao Hua was still hesitant. He was afraid that the golden core cultivators in the conference hall would get to the bottom of the matter and his benefits would be discovered. Li Zongbao obviously understood Xiao Hua's thoughts and said coldly, don't pay attention to them. Don't talk about anything that you don't want to talk about. Your things are your things. If others want them, they have to get your permission. If you think it's inappropriate, you can push all the blame to me. Yes, I know. Xiao Hua was delighted. Actually, what secrets, what schemes, in the face of absolute strength, they are all in vain. Li Zongbao said proudly. I don't believe that a sword cultivator can control the outcome of a battle between Dao cultivators with a flying sword. Xiao Hua heard and felt that it was reasonable. Even he himself might not be afraid of the Supreme Light Sword, let alone a nascent soul cultivator. But what about those sword formations? Xiao Hua reminded. Sword cultivators have sword formations. My Dao sect naturally also has formations. Li Zongbao said indifferently. Although the Dao of formations has declined, it's still more than enough to deal with sword formations. Don't worry, and this matter isn't up to you and me. We just need to remind them. Okay, I understand. Xiao Hua nodded. Then the three of them hurried on with their journey. Another 10 days passed. During this time, Xiao Mao was really eager to learn. While Xiao Hua was steering the flying boat, he sat cross-legged beside Xiao Hua. If he had any questions, he would immediately send a voice transmission to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua would also immediately answer him. His tireless appearance was not inferior to a strict teacher. On this day, they were passing through a vast expanse of white snow. In order to avoid suspicion, Li Zongbao stood in front of the flowing cloud-flying boat with his hands folded. He heard the sound of a treasure rumbling in front of him. Li Zongbao scanned with his divine sense and shouted, "Don't hurt my Dao sect disciple." -8. Chapter 24-27. Zhang Qishao took it and looked at it with her divine sense. She sneered, "Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra? Is this the Buddhist Heart Sutra you cultivate?" I knew it. Buddhism is the nemesis of demonic arts. Demonic arts can also peek at Buddhist Heart Sutra. Xiao Hua did not answer directly. He waved his hand and said, "Let Jiang Luer take a look at this Heart Sutra. If he can cultivate it, he can cultivate the Buddhist Heart Sutra. When I have time, I will give him some pointers." Is there a difference between Buddhism and demonic cultivators? Zhang Qishao disdainfully put away the golden puppet and said coldly, "Buddhism has long been extinct, but my demonic cultivators are going to prosper." Immediately, Zhang Qishao patted her storage bag again and took out a jade pendant and handed it to Xiao Hua. "This is what junior sister asked me to bring to you." "What is this?" Xiao Hua was a little strange. "Junior sister found it in the ancestral hall," Zhang Qishao said. "It seems to be a cultivation technique of mine, Shang Huaming. It leans towards body cultivation. She said that you are my, Shang Huaming's, disciple and the only one suitable to cultivate it, so she entrusted me to bring it to you." Xiao Hua did not care and put it into the space. He smiled and said, "If I don't give you the golden puppet, you will forget about this matter?" "Who knows?" Zhang Qishao spread her hands. "You gave me the golden puppet, and I will also give you the cultivation method." "Okay." Xiao Hua was helpless and asked worriedly, "When will the demonic cultivators from Meng Mountain arrive? How can I help you?" You can help me?" Zhang Qishao smiled bitterly. "You should take care of yourself first." Xiao Hua waved his hand and the wishful staff appeared in his hand. His body moved like a ghost, and the sound of the wind on the wishful staff immediately rang in Zhang Qingxiao's ears. Zhang Qingxiao's face changed greatly. It was too late to bring out the bright scenery bell. He immediately pointed his finger, and a faint demonic chi flew out from his hand and blocked the wishful staff. Contrary to Zhang Qingxiao's expectations, the wishful steel staff looked at his devil chi as if it was nothing. It directly blocked the devil chi and struck in front of him. Zhang Qishao was shocked and wanted to move. But at this time, Xiao Hua's hand stopped. The wishful steel rod was firmly placed in front of him. He smiled and said, "Can I help you?" Your staff is the 5 elements wishful heaven staff you were talking about? What kind of refining method is it?" Understanding Xiao Hua's intentions, Zhang Qishao was overjoyed. "It's not that simple." Xiao Hua put away the wishful steel rod and sighed. "It's just a prototype. I'm not afraid of the devil chi. If you want, this thing can help you, right?" Yes, of course it can." Zhang Qishao hurriedly nodded. "If even my devil chi can't resist it, then the devil chi of others also can't resist it." Then Zhang Qishao thought for a moment and said, "How about this? You wait for my message. If I introduce you to someone who calls you the deputy sect leader of the heavenly demon sect, you can kill him with a blow of your stick." "Of course," Xiao Hua said proudly. Killing a few devil dwellers was not a burden to Xiao Hua. "Alas, it's really at the end of the road, there's always a glimmer of hope." Zhang Qishao sighed. "I didn't think that there would be a day when I could use junior brother." "Well, why say more?" Xiao Hua looked into the distance and smiled. "If you and I talk too much, others will be suspicious." "Well, okay." Zhang Qishao nodded, but then shouted, By the way, the rejuvenation pill in the Sky Patrol City was refined by you, right? Oh? How do you know? Xiaohua asked curiously. Humph, Junior Sister and Zhang Yutong's faces changed. How can I not know? Zhang Qishao said snappily. Ha ha ha, so you want to give the face-retaining pill to Zhang Yutong? Xiaohua laughed. Hey, if I don't give it to her, who should I give it to? Zhang Qishao proudly said. For me, she sold the Xianjian sect to me. What's the big deal about giving her a pill? Well, I really didn't mean it. Maybe this is the legendary big boobs but no brain. Xiaohua nodded with a lewd smile. Zhang Qishao sneered. The big boobs are mine, the small boobs are mine, I'm happy. Don't be complacent too early, Xiaohua said, then took out a storage bag and stuffed it to Zhang Qishao. The rice seeds from last time must have been distributed. Take these and continue. Are you kidding me? Zhang Qishao almost jumped up. You haven't found the spiritual herbs I want yet. How can you get so many rice seeds? Don't you think I'm such an unkind person? Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh. You still think you're kind? Zhang Qingxiao's divine sense swept, and was also slightly moved. The spiritual herbs recorded in the jade slips she gave Xiaohua last time were all in the storage bag. I exchanged these for you in the Sky Patrol City. Xiaohua smiled. Don't be ungrateful. I know. Zhang Qishao waved her hand. Although she didn't care about it, her heart was warm. She asked casually, What do you need? Qianli pill and Lingli pill. Xiaohua did not hesitate. If there is a brilliant gold attribute Jindan practice method, I will accept it. Humph. Gold attribute Jindan practice method, forget it. I don't have it, and what do you want it for? Zhang Qingxiao's face was bitter. However, there are some Qianli pill and Lingli pill here, enough for you. Saying that, Zhang Qishao took out a few jade bottles and threw them to Xiaohua. I didn't expect you to just prepare to condense Jindan. Zhang Qishao didn't forget to ask. Then why is your spiritual power so strong? Why should I tell you? Xiaohua's divine sense swept the 2 jade bottles and saw 4 or 5 elixirs in them. He threw them into the space and said, These are not enough. Help me find some more, or give me the prescriptions of these 2 elixirs. What? These are not enough? Zhang Qingxiao was shocked. These are Qianli pill and Lingli pill. Do you think they are green beans? Besides, what do you want the prescriptions of these 2 elixirs? Can't Huayuan pill of the Baichao sect also condense Jinan? Besides, the prescriptions of Qianli pill and Lingli pill are regarded as secrets by all sections. Although our heavenly devil sect has some strength. But if we covet the practitioners above Jindan realm, I'm afraid it won't work. Speaking of this, Zhang Qishao pondered a little and asked, You can also bid in the Sentry City. Oh, how many do you want? Zhang Qishao obviously thought of something. The more, the better. Although Xiaohua had the prescriptions of Lingli pill and Qianli pill, he didn't guarantee that he could refine them. Besides, he didn't have time to refine Huayuan pill. How could it be more convenient than the ready-made elixirs? However, Xiaohua wanted to keep his mouth shut. However, his decision to keep his mouth shut came too late. Zhang Qishao naturally knew a lot from it. Well, then I'll take my disciples to other big cities and auction places. Zhang Qishao knew that Qianli pill and Lingli pill were related to Xiaohua's condensing Jindan. He didn't dare to be careless and nodded. Well, if you find it, you can send me a message, or let your disciples go to the station of the Thunder sect in the Sentry City to find me. Xiaohua was not polite and looked around. Can your magic matrix block their vision? Of course, Zhang Qishao said proudly. Well, in this case, I'm leaving. If there's anything, I'll send you a message again. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, Okay. Zhang Qishao also nodded. When you leave, I'll take my disciples to deal with this matter. Well, you send Zhang Yutong back. If there's really something. Alas, forget it, I'd better not show up. Xiaohua suddenly thought of something and smiled bitterly. If there's any fighting or killing, you can call me. Ha ha ha, It seems that junior fellow apprentice has killed a lot of sword practitioners. Zhang Qixiao laughed. Xiaohua was angry and said coldly, Isn't this all because of you? Ha ha ha, Zhang Qixiao still laughed wildly. He waved his hand and said, Even if I did it, so what? You and I will fight sooner or later. Since you have a task, let's do it according to the old agreement. Xiaohua sneered. He turned around and flew toward Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao in the distance. -8. Chapter 24-28. As he spoke, he took out the immortal piercing whip from his storage pouch. With a sway of his body, he flew out of the flowing cloud-flying ship and charged into the battle ahead. Xiaohua had heard Li Zongbao's words more than 10 times in the past 10 days. He did not care and did not release his divine force. He turned his head and said with a smile, Xiao Mao, your senior brother Li has already made his move. Don't you want to move around a bit? Haha, since Big Brother has given the order, I will naturally make my move. Xiao Mao opened his eyes and said, However, don't let Big Brother save you in the end like 3 days ago. Go! Xiaohua said with a smile. Your master is right. You and senior brother Li are the same. Both of you need to increase your cultivation through fighting. Don't worry about anything. Big Brother will watch over you. Yes, little brother understands. As he spoke, Xiao Mao patted his storage pouch and held the universe ring in his hand. He activated his dermic powers and it turned into a foot long. It emitted a brilliant light and flew into the battle ahead. Seeing that the two of them had flown away, Xiaohua also put away the flowing cloud-flying ship and used the wind escape to follow behind them. Seeing that Li Zongbao's immortal piercing whip had already flown into the battle, Xiaohua scanned with his divine force. It turned out that there were 4 people who were enchanted. Their opponents were 6,000 Leaf Ridge disciples. When Li Zongbao killed his way into the battle, there was still one cultivator who was struggling to hold on. Damn it! Fight! Although Li Zongbao could not determine whether the 4 enchanted people were sword cultivators, he recognized the Taoist robes of the 1,000 Leaf Ridge disciples like Xiaohua. How could he not help the 1,000 Leaf Ridge disciples? With a wave of his hand, the earth-shattering whip shadows wrapped around the 4 bewildered cultivators. Haha, there are meddlesome cultivators who want to die! A slightly hoarse voice came from one of the enchanted people. Then, he attacked the 1,000 Leaf Ridge disciple's dermic artifact. He abandoned the 1,000 Leaf Ridge disciple and stood in front of the 4 people. The dermic artifact was long and flat. It looked like a drum or a stick. Its surface emitted a faint black mist. Xiaohua frowned slightly. Poof! A series of muffled sounds could be heard. It was as if the divine piercing whip had hit a quagmire. Although the black mist was completely dispersed, his divine piercing whip had also stopped. At this moment, one of the people next to him waved his hand, and a round Dharma artifact that looked like a bell flew into the air. It shook above the 1,000 Leaf Ridge disciple's head twice, and a strange red mist flew out of the bell Dharma artifact, killing the 1,000 Leaf Ridge disciple in midair. Hiss! Li Zongbao narrowed his eyes slightly. This 1,000 Leaf Ridge disciple was at the peak of the early-stage foundation establishment realm, but he could not resist this person at all. If it was not because the difference in cultivation was too great, then there was something wrong with this person's ritual implement. Suddenly, Li Zongbao seemed to have thought of something. He held the immortal piercing whip in his hand and urged his magic power. The runes on the immortal piercing whip slightly appeared and slowly rotated on the surface of the whip. At this moment, the other person who had not made a move all this time clapped his hand, and a bell appeared in his hand. Sigh! Xiaohua had been puzzled for a long time. When he saw the bright scenic bell, he sighed. He urged his magic power to fly to the front and whispered to Li Zongbao. Senior brother Li, wait a moment! Oh? Li Zongbao was stunned. However, he did not withdraw his magic power. Instead, he held the immortal piercing whip and watched Xiaohua's actions quietly. Haha, another one who wants to die! The person who was holding the bell Dharma artifact laughed. Just as he was about to take out his ritual implement, he heard the other person say coldly, "All of you, back off!" "Yes, young master." The person was stunned and quickly put away his bell. The other person also put away his ritual implement, and the two of them retreated more than 3 meters. "You really didn't die?" a hoarse voice sounded. "Hee, are you happy that I'm dead?" Xiaohua sneered. "That's right. You can't die. If you die, won't I be lonely? Who in this world can be my opponent?" Although the hoarse voice did not have a tone, it was obviously very hostile. "The battle between you and me, the time is not right yet. What do you want to do?" Xiaohua was also very hostile. "What do I want to do? What do you think?" the person said again. "With the 2 people behind you, you might be able to escape. But them? Not necessarily." Xiaohua was also disdainful. "How do you know if you don't try?" Xiao Mao roared behind him. "Shut up!" the person coldly berated. "You're a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator. This is not the place for you to speak. Don't speak first." Xiaohua waved his hand and said to Li Zongbao, "Senior Brother Li, this is my former opponent. I have some agreement with him." "Senior Brother Li and Junior Brother Xiao, are you?" "Yes, I understand." "You be more careful." Li Zongbao suddenly understood. He waved his hand, and the immortal piercing whip was still in his hand. He flew back. Xiao Mao looked at Xiaohua and was somewhat worried. However, he also flew over with Li Zongbao. "You two also retreat." The person waved his hand and said, "Yes." The 2 bewildered people who had already retreated 10 feet back immediately moved their bodies backward again until they could no longer see what was in front of them. However, the other lost souls stood quietly in mid-air and ignored him. Xiaohua saw this and frowned slightly. "Hee, Yutong, this is a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect that I befriended. He's very powerful. In the future, if you have any important matters, try to find him as much as possible." As he spoke, the person lifted the lid. Who else could it be other than the head of the heavenly demon sect, Zhang Qi? "Yutong?" Xiaohua was slightly stunned and looked at the person. "Xiaohua? You're the Qi refinement disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect, Xiaohua?" The person lifted the lid. Wasn't it Zhang Yutong, whom the sword cultivator had been looking for? "What? Yutong, you know Xiaohua?" Zhang Qi was also shocked. He never dreamed that Zhang Yutong would know Xiaohua. "Of course I know him," Zhang Yutong said with emotion. "Before I was captured by my husband, I saw Xiaohua at the Taiqing Sect's Feather Immortal Assembly." "Ha! That's right, your husband neglected this matter. This Xiaoyu continent is still too small." Zhang Qi rubbed his nose and smiled bitterly. "Zhang Yutong, where's your sister Zhang Yuha?" Xiaohua's face was not relaxed. He knew that Zhang Yutong and Zhang Yuha were the cause of this sword battle. Zhang Yutong was here, so she was naturally captured by Zhang Qi. However, where was Zhang Yuha? "I don't know where she went." Zhang Yutong shook her head. "I heard from my husband that he didn't capture my sister." "Husband?" Xiaohua said coldly. "Zhang Qi, when did you marry a sword cultivator? What does it have to do with you who I marry?" Zhang Qi curled his lips and replied, "I don't care who you marry." When Xiaohua saw that Zhang Qi was with Zhang Yutong and that Zhang Yutong mentioned that she was captured by Zhang Qi, he immediately understood everything. Knowing that this sword battle was instigated by the Heavenly Demon Sect, he couldn't help but feel angry. After all, he had personally witnessed the deaths of many cultivators and swordsmen. This could be said to be Zhang Qingxiao's fault. His tone was already unkind. "I just want to know." Xiaohua was about to ask, but he felt that it was inconvenient with Zhang Yutong beside him, so he shut his mouth. "Husband," Zhang Yutong pursed her lips and smiled. "What's your relationship with Xiaohua? When were you going to fight to the death? He's only at the middle stage of foundation establishment. How can he be your opponent? Besides, you have a grudge with him." How can you entrust me to him? Tisk, Zhang Qishao said disdainfully. Don't be fooled by his appearance of being at the middle stage of foundation establishment. This guy is the best at deceiving people. Not to mention that you're not his opponent with your cultivation at the first stage of illusory sword stage. Even I don't have the confidence to kill him. If he's really at the middle stage of foundation establishment, then I'm really just a small fry in the heavenly demon sect. Xiao Hua frowned when he heard this. He had a good impression of Zhang Yutong, but it didn't reach the level of trust. Moreover, although Zhang Yutong was Zhang Qingxiao's wife, Zhang Qishao wouldn't talk about trust for no reason. Sure enough, he heard Zhang Qishao say again. However, although this guy is a cultivator of the Dao sect and doesn't get along with my heavenly demon sect, he has a noble character. When I wasn't in charge of the heavenly demon sect, he was a close friend. Otherwise, how could I introduce you to him? Husband, you're a bit strange. Zhang Yutong's charming face slightly raised and said with a smile. With the strength of the heavenly demon sect, why do you need to rely on others? Husband, are you? Zhang Yutong also looked at Xiao Hua with vigilance. How do you women know about the matters between men? Zhang Qishao casually waved his hand. Wife, please avoid him for a moment. This husband will tell him about your duel. Yes, this concubine understands. Zhang Yutong bowed obediently and also turned to leave. With a wave of her hand, Zhang Qishao set up a layer of restriction without anyone noticing. Zhang Qishao. Xiao Hua was confused, but for the sake of righteousness, he was still cold. The cultivators of the Dao sect have been fighting with the swordsmen of the Sword Cultivators sect for nearly 10 years. Do you know how many people have died? You kidnapped Zhang Yutong. Even if it was for her beauty, you could have just come to propose marriage. Why did you start a war between cultivators? What's your motive? Ha 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 ha. Zhang Qishao looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. His eyes were about to shed tears of ridicule. He pointed at Xiao Hua and said, Little junior brother, oh little junior brother, everyone in the world can scold me like this. But you absolutely can't. Oh? Xiao Hua frowned and vaguely realized something in his heart. Although Zhang Yutong is a beauty, I'm also fond of her now and am willing to grow old with her. But if it was only for this reason, do you think I would kidnap her? Without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak again, Zhang Qishao said angrily, I kidnapped her to start a war between cultivators of the Tao of the Sword. I want the war between sword cultivators that hasn't been heard from for many years to rise again. Only in this way will the nascent soul cultivator who killed my master have the chance to be killed by a sword cultivator on the battlefield. Only in this way will the sect that destroyed me, Shang Huaming, be exposed on the battlefield. -8. Chapter 24-29. No, he must be back. Li Zongbao shook his head and said, Although this senior is not in charge of the secret teleportation array, it must lead directly to Sky Patrol City. That's strange. Xiao Hua scratched his head, and the Golden Core cultivator had a strange expression on his face. However, this expression disappeared in a flash, and the Golden Core cultivator asked, Are you going back to Sky Patrol City? Do you have a token? When Li Zongbao took out the token, the Golden Core cultivator checked the token and sent Xiao Hua and the other two into the transmission array. Only then did the Golden Core cultivator look at the gradually disappearing transmission array, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he muttered to himself. Hee, the Imperial Thunder Sect. However, the Golden Core cultivator's smile disappeared again. He reached out his hand and took out a disc-shaped array device. He frowned and said, Which cultivator's spiritual sense was it? How could it be so powerful? Or was it a sword cultivator? No matter who it is, my teleportation array is going to change location again. Xiao Hua and the others came out of the teleportation array. Although they had used the teleportation talisman, they were still not used to it. As soon as Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao came out of the teleportation array, they sat cross-legged in the empty space in the distance and closed their eyes to adjust their breathing. Xiao Hua naturally followed. Just as Xiaohua was pretending, the teleportation array flashed and 3 late-stage golden core cultivators appeared in the array. Eh? Isn't this fellow Taoist Qingbai? The golden core cultivator in charge of the teleportation array saw them from afar and hurried over. He cupped his hands and greeted the graceful female cultivator in front of him. Hee, so it's fellow Taoist Bingyu. I haven't seen you for many years, but you're still as charming as ever. The female cultivator looked at the middle-stage golden core cultivator and smiled. I wouldn't dare. How can I be compared to fellow Taoist Qingbai's beauty and youth? Bingyu hurriedly waved his hands modestly and said, Besides, I's cultivation hasn't improved after so many years. On the other hand, fellow Taoist Qingbai has obtained an opportunity and soared to the sky. You're about to conceive a baby. I'm really envious. No matter how beautiful I am, I can't compare to the rejuvenation pill of your Sky Patrol City. Qingbai covered her mouth and giggled. It was obvious that she enjoyed it. However, she still said, I came here today to ask for a rejuvenation pill from fellow Taoist Wen. When Bingyu heard this, her face was extremely unnatural. She smiled apologetically and said, If it's something else, I can still do my best, but that thing. Cough cough, fellow Taoist Qingbai said it in vain. Why don't you just tell Tu Hong directly when you see him? He's now the mayor's favorite. Fellow Taoist Frostfeather, why are you only exchanging pleasantries with fellow Taoist Qingbai? Do you think we're nothing? A white-haired golden core cultivator next to him teased. Could it be that you have the same thoughts as fellow Taoists too? Bah! Qingbai spat lightly, but she wasn't angry. No. Bingyu hurriedly bowed and said, I greet fellow Taoist Yunqin and fellow Taoist Ji Fan. However, fellow Taoist Qingbai walked in front of me, so I just said a few words. Hee, greetings fellow Taoist Frost Feather. Although Yunqin and Ji Fan's cultivation levels were higher, they still bowed and talked to each other as if they were peers. As they spoke, several teleportation arrays flashed, and a dozen foundation establishment and Qi refinement disciples of various sects came out of the teleportation arrays. When they saw the golden core cultivators here, they all bowed respectfully. However, because they had just come out of the teleportation arrays, they all felt dizzy and uncomfortable. Forget it, we'd better hurry up and leave, Qingbai said with a smile. We're really delaying fellow Taoist Frostfeather's task. Okay. Bingyu nodded and said, Today is fellow Taoist Tu's happy occasion, so many fellow Taoists have come to congratulate him. I will wait here. When I'm not busy, I will go to Tu Hong's residence to exchange pleasantries with all of you. Then Bingyu raised her head and shouted, Guards, take the 3 division masters there. Hee, there's no need for that. Yunqin waved his hand and said, It's not like we haven't been to Tu Hong's residence before. Why bother? Well, all right. You're old friends of Patrol City and Tu Hong's close friends. You're not outsiders, so I won't be polite. Well said. Qingbai and the other 2 division masters cupped their hands and walked out quickly. Eh? What's Tu Hong's happy occasion? Xiaohua, who was next to him, heard it clearly. Although he did not open his eyes, he had some doubts in his heart. Tu Hong had ambushed the disciples of the first team of the thunder-controlling sect in the abandoned mineral vein. Although they were not sent out to fight the enemy, they were completely trapped in the formation and had no chance of survival. If it were not for Xiaohua, who was lucky to have the protection of the Phoenix celestial body, the 7 of them would have been killed. Xiaohua did not know Tu Hong's purpose, but did he need to know? If others did not offend him, he would not offend them. If others offended him, he would kill them. In Xiaohua's eyes, Tu Hong was already a dead man. Xiaohua did not want to participate in the battle of the spiritual stone vein. On one hand, he did not want to reveal his strength. On the other hand, he wanted to return to Patrol City and see if there was a chance to kill Tu Hong. To be honest, in the entire Patrol City, among the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, Xiaohua was only afraid of the Shuiyu sage. He wanted to see if there was a chance to kill Tu Hong without the Shuiyu sage knowing. However, He did not expect to hear about Tu Hong's good news just as he came out of the teleportation formation. How could he not pay attention to it? What good news? Xiaohua muttered. Could it be that he has entered the middle stage of the Golden Core Realm? Or the late stage of the Golden Core Realm? So what? I'll kill them all. Junior brother Xiao, how's your rest? Li Zongbao's voice came. Well, I'm good. Xiaohua and Xiao Mao's voices came at the same time. Xiaohua heard it and smiled. He opened his eyes and said, Senior brotherly, you don't have to be polite in the future. Just call me by my name. Well, Li Zongbao nodded, stood up and said, In that case, we'll go to the meeting hall. But at this moment, the nearest teleportation formation flashed with black and white brilliance. A middle-stage Foundation establishment disciple of the Xunyan school appeared from the teleportation formation covered in blood. Beside him was a patrol city disciple supporting him. However, just as the two figures appeared, the Xunyan school disciple staggered and spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. He fainted on the patrol city disciple. What happened? Bingyu saw it, and did not dare to be negligent. She hurriedly flew over and shouted, Reporting to Marshal and Bingyu! The patrol city disciple hurriedly shouted, This Xunyan school disciple came from the Gale's snowfield. He said that Xunyan school attacked the spiritual stone vein occupied by the sword cultivators. In the end, they were ambushed. Qin Jian and the other illusory sword cultivators had already set up a trap. All the Golden Core cultivators were killed. -8. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.